Welcome, worldographers and world builders alike, to episode 14 of the World Hammer, where I read lore from across the multiverse and perhaps yours. All the entries seen here are submitted by talented writers from our Atovia Discord community based on a daily prompt project called Built Together and tagged for World Hammer. If you would like your own works read aloud, you are not only welcome but encouraged to join our Discord and submit your own. Now back to the Forge to see what's been built. Now, I do want to say that now that we have this buffer built in, we should have a better spread across the prompts when it comes to the density of the number of responses, and hopefully our writers are a little less panicked to get something in at sort of the last second when there's only a few days separating prompts being written and recording and editing being finalized. So let's get started with the first prompt of the episode, which was day 488, and the prompt was, how fast does new technology become obsolete in your world? And this came from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord. Carhop writes, advancements in fungal technology, an entry in Restris. Cove Barrel, advancements in fungal technology, a treatise on zygot's usefulness in the modern age, University of Liberin, 895 PFB. Across histories, both real and imagined, there are several unwavering truths. One of these is that war is the most rapid engine of technological advancement. Restris is no exception to this truth and has seen its technology rapidly shift in response to conflict again and again. The Pavonian War brought about rune-speaking and the first weaponized enchantments such as wands, staves, and rune-etched blades. Enchanted armors and accessories followed shortly after the Pavon had fallen, made necessary by the assassination attempts and coups that naturally come with power vacuums. The Conjunction Revolt and its aftermath brought limited reuse wing-scale vellum scrolls to be, along with undetectable poisons and their antidotes. Concurrently, and for several decades after, the First War saw the rise of technological marvels such as siege engines, mass scribing via mechanical processes, concussive explosives, rune-powered constructs, and medicines which prolonged their freshness in small, compact capsules. While all of these aforementioned technologies have maintained their presence in some way, many other innovations have been rendered obsolete by our most present and persistent conflict. Shortly after the Fell Bloom started, industrious folks across the world from all species, cultures, and governments began to find ways to use the latent primal chaos found inside the remnants of the Sporeborn and Fell Beasts. Ever-glowing lanterns were one of the first pieces of fungal technology to be crafted, credited to an NYUX druid whose name has been lost to time. These small glass terrariums, filled with the bioluminescent lichen found inside Fell Beast lungs, are still used by many today. Another early example of fungal technology are blight-wrought ivory weapons, carved from the bones of the infected and inscribed with a portion of Falder's title, invoking her ability to disrupt chaos with chaos. These weapons would later inspire some of the most popular forms of fungal technology, black steel weaponry and armor. In the modern age, Amaniri constructs are fueled and given magical potency by furnaces which burn infected corpses, and the College of the Woven Aether powers its campuses with harvested and reanimated mycelium networks worked into the shapes of runes. Researchers at the University of Liberin have created systems to heat and cool entire rooms and buildings using similar concepts as their subterranean counterparts. The university's Orawasho branch is currently developing portable heat generators and cold boxes with the aim of making life more tolerable for the commissioned mercenaries and settlers under a directive from the Council of Mateno. These are but a few examples of the hundreds of technological advances stemming from the advent of the zygote fungus, many of which are still completely unknown outside of certain circles. Savvy researchers with connections outside of academia believe that the Uruksali, Kori, Karethi, certain occultist circles, frayed mages, and miscellaneous rogue agents have developed technologies the High Arborist of the Grafted Cathedral would deem unethical. It will be interesting to see how the current conflict, which I intend to pitch to the Quorum of Histories, Anthropologies, and Humanities as the Siege of the Spore, continues to turn the wheel of progress. For this researcher's part, we have high hopes that the University and Her Majesty will lead us into a new age where fungal threats are entirely mitigated and technological advances accelerate at rates unimagined. One of the things that I mentioned when I discussed this prompt on the short-form content was the fact that wars are usually the most driving force historically for all of technological advancement, and this is a great way that we're seeing this used by Carhop. The impetus for so much of technology, even technology that is good and useful, comes out of, the horrible things that sapient entities want to inflict on one another, unfortunately. Probin the Great writes, "The fracking plant, an entry in what lies west." He notes at the top, "Rattle big black bones in the danger zone. There's a rumblin' groan down below." The proper entry begins now. Musical. Clanging iron pipes, slamming pumps. It's a wonder of engineering, too. Definitely dwarf-made, no doubt about it, but it's new to us. Has to be. I can't imagine a place that massive has been hiding for 40-plus years without so much as a glimpse of it from adventurers. It's unsettling to me how something so big can hide for so long. Harold Green, Adventurer. The fracking plant is a region of the West, characterized as a massive swath of rocky sediment with numerous massive machines across its surface. These frackers, as dwarven engineers call them, are highly complex machines used to extract gaseous or liquid substances from great depths. The ones within the region seem to have at one point been after deep mantle oil reserves. According to ancient dwarven documents found within some derelict buildings, report that multiple of the frackers' extractors go down 20 to 30 miles into the earth. These machines have persisted in an activated state for so long that whatever they were previously mining has long since run dry, though some pockets deep below contain an altogether completely new gas-based material. This bright, glowing blue cloud is known by adventurers as the Haze, a virulent cerulean cloud that kills in seconds, mask or not. The cloud maintains a highly compact formation. Creatures that enter, or rather become surrounded by the cloud, are crushed under extreme pressure, instantly liquefying most creatures, adventurers included. This mass of flesh is then disintegrated or perhaps digested by the cloud before the haze moves on. To see more information regarding the haze, please locate my document on the very matter. These harvesting machines have been thoroughly examined and even reverse engineered to a degree, but without the tools to locate deep mantle resources, they currently serve zero purpose. As with many of the extremely high-tech relics left behind by the old Empire of the West, mortal kind remains incapable of using any of it. The fracking plant has a high concentration of surface minerals and sulfuric vents as well, taking the idea of resource wealth to an extreme. Copper veins bleed into the air, poisoning it. Methane gas vents choke out mine shafts. Sulfuric geysers burn off layers of skin. While there is much to be gained from access to the fracking plant, thus far it has never been the first stop of any adventurers, suggesting that, like the Colossal Rift, it exists further away than the other regions by an extreme margin. Still, smaller pockets of less extreme minerals can be gathered and taken back to the City of Worms for a hefty profit. Never get greedy, though, as some of the unique monsters within the fracking plant's bounds do not take kindly to overexploitation of their home. The fracking plant is perhaps the most hostile to life of any inhabited region. While places like the Swallowed City are dominated by one single life form, making them hostile to all other forms of it, the fracking plant is acidic, poisonous, and has no plant life whatsoever. The sheer number of gaseous poisons is enough to kill 100 million men thrice over, but that same chemical imbalance is what allows extremophile monsters to be born and created here. Revenants. Native. Mutants that got a whiff of the haze and were let go by the cloud, leaving them hollow mortals with glowing blue eyes and hulking, spindly forms. Britala. Native. Hulking masses of flesh and stone that can be found looming over sulfuric vents to collect energy. Apex herbivores of the region. At adult size, they are untouchable by anything else in the West, though that only comes from their home. Dwarven for brittle. Drymond claws. Native. Pack hunter no larger than a horse. A granite-based layer of armor protects soft innards that, while edible, taste rotten. Their claws are almost entirely made of compressed carbon, also known as diamond, dwarven for diamond claw. Tanrax. Native. Migrating hunter, found near sulfuric vents in a hibernating state covered with the skin of other monsters. Since the region's discovery last month, Tanrax have been seen in other regions hunting large monsters for their hides, for as of yet unknown reasons. Make notes when seen, non-threat to mortals, smaller than a minotaur. Terracins. Elemental, found wherever geomancy is most potent. Harmless wanderers on their own, though based on their composition they may be poisonous to remain near. Arcanosaurs. Non-native, sometimes seen at the outer edges of the region searching for aberrant jerboa that may be in the vicinity. Killfreaks. Mutant, found walking through the desolate halls of the structure above and below the earth here, mercy kill at convenience. Cerulean whimsies. Native, seen floating above or inside of haze pockets. When touched, they warp to resemble an adventurer's preferred weapon for a brief moment before reforming. Aberrant jerboa, non-native, can be glimpsed darting rock to rock in search of gallium worms to eat. Gallium worms, native, small invertebrates that make up the lowermost layer of the ecosystem within the fracking plant, speculated to metamorphize into the Britala or other large life forms within the plant. Exterminators, automata, produced locally. Towering metal monstrosities once meant for pest control, now purpose-built for slaughter. Nothing save for the Britala can withstand their blows and noxious poisons. Glass slugs, non-native, invasive. After hitching a ride on some adventurers, the slugs have begun infecting the local monster population. Many argue that this is a good thing. The Bathka come and go to harvest ores, allegedly knowing of this place far longer than the City of Worms has. Another cool look at a lot of the derelict technology, the old world, the ancient history of what lies west. One of my favorite parts about this setting, for sure, the more that we get to hear about it, all of the strange things that are being discovered that the current historical era or the current era of what lies west can do nothing with. They've got strange batteries, crazy heavy-duty machinery, and all of it is things that are foreign in terms of their function still. They understand maybe what they were for, but have no way of actually utilizing them themselves or reverse engineering any of it. It's a great premise. For day 489, the prompt was, what are some scavengers and decomposers in your world's ecosystem? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. Bulbman 5000 writes, Carrion Eaters. There are multiple carrion eaters on Seroth, many of whom are also used by different cultures as indicators of things like apex predator animals. A fantastical example is Vorult, a large carrion eater bird with a wingspan of 12 to 13 feet with a predominantly dark gray coloration. Known for their habit of circling around seemingly dying animals, they tend to form groups of 3 to 5 to hunt for carrion. Due to their diet, they also stay near the territory of apex predators or around large groups of prey animals as they rarely hunt themselves. Another example is the gorger mantis, another carrion eater. These insects tend to feast on the same meals as Vorult groups, but due to the size difference, with the gorger mantis being roughly 8 inches in length, they don't tend to fight each other very much. However, the gorger mantis has a tendency to disturb peoples of the numerous civilizations with their pitch-black carapace appearing like black spots on decaying meat. These are but 2 of several species that eat carrion, but are usually the most well-known. But there is always one rule to follow when it comes to nature, especially in the age of Scourge. If even the carrion eaters flee, run and do not look back. I feel like Bulbman has got a lot of interesting room for very fun bugs. I know that there's like blood bees or something. I don't remember what those were called. There's some kind of bee that takes care of the Scourge. There's gorger mantises out here. Really kind of a great name, actually. That one landed really well to me. And then sort of a classic vulture-like creature, but good stuff to have down. I love, anyone coming up with their own flora and fauna, I think is super compelling. Makes a world feel a lot more alive, a lot more unique. From the Great Rights, Bloat Kings, Vren, and the Carnal Wyverns, an entry and What Lies West. Pro in the Great Notes at the top. I hope that this isn't too much writing, but I took the opportunity to include a few monsters in this one. Also, obviously, the Vren were my plan for my bees post, but I was too busy to write about them, so here they are now. Bloat Kings. Affettered they be, the bloat kings whose feasts echo through carcasses of titans. Where not, ye who find such a beast belayed by its bulk, it is of no threat to they of sound skin and bone. Ashcram who speaks strange, scholar and adventurer. Call signs, slurping noises, presence of rot, hellishly rancid smells. Bloat Kings are monsters of the West that roam between the ossuary reach, devastated mesas, and sorrowed weald. Bloat Kings closely resemble massive flies with adult specimens who found stable sources of food weighing nearly 3 tons, according to scholarly adventurers like Skreek and Ashcram. Harold Green's party once reported a Bloat King 3 times the record size, though obviously cannot exactly prove it with the creature's size. Bloat kings are primary decomposers for regions they appear in, with the bloat kings increasing in size between certain regions following their migration to adulthood. Starting as nymphs, bloat princes begin their lives within the devastated mesas. Here they primarily collect the pollen of canyon lilies and feast on dead monsters such as redricruki, chasm crawlers, and maybe, if they're lucky, a dead Crozran destroyer. Moving past their infantile stage, the bloat prince migrates to the sorrowed weald, where its larger size allows it to avoid carnivorous plant life such as Visuvii and surgeons. Here, it likely takes the opportunity to ingest more magic-rich monsters such as walking bastions, creeping toads, and even perhaps the ever-elusive manfishers. Finally, after reaching sizes large enough to question how it maintains flight at all, the bloat king will migrate to the ossuary reach, where its now immense size means it can anchor itself in place onto, under, or inside of one of the giant, ever-rotting carcasses within the reach. Upon reaching this size, nothing native to the reach can kill a bloat king, though many may take a bite or two in passing. It will not result in great harm to the bloat king as they keep a dense layer of foam between their skin and organs. This foam is noxious even to the natives of the reach, such as bone dogs. Finally, after a massive amount of time feasting on flesh, the bloat king will burst apart into a cloud of their nymphs that will migrate back to the devastated mesas. Bloat kings play too massive a role in the ecosystems they find themselves in to name all of their predators, but namely, they are prized by chasm crawler hunters, creeping toads, and Crozran destroyers when fully grown. Sometimes, a bloat king will consume something infected by the deep and mutate into a devourer. Vren. They're bees, but fancy. Gertz, ribmangler, adventurer. Call signs, visual presence, buzzing sounds. Vren are monsters of the West found within the sorrowed weald. At a cursory glance, they resemble eastern bees. At a closer one, though, they are revealed to be far removed from the standard bee pattern, as it were. Vren possess circular, oscillating mouths, allowing them to cut, bite, and even pollinate with their fuzzy little tongues. Their bite is noted as painful, but not deadly. Vren are opportunistic decomposers, being primarily pollinators and light predators. Colonies of Vren, being upwards of 300 or so members strong, can be found in the only dry places within the weald, the undersides of Corsair's balconies. These nests are made from processed plant fibers, namely comprised of Madman's Requiem, though the chemicals responsible for delirium are long since inert. Instead, the smell of a dead requiem attracts other insects to the nest, which are either consumed by the Vren or incorporated into the hive if the attracted insect is a Vel beetle. Vel beetles and Vren bees are mutualistically symbiotic, a term that means that both creatures benefit from one another. I really need to stop using such big words, don't I? Anyways, Vel beetles, as their name suggests, are electromancers. Vren will feed Vel beetles and offer them shelter. In exchange, the Vel is expected to defend the colony from more resilient predators like creeping toads when they appear. While Vren do possess stingers, many creatures from the weald have actually adapted a mucus lining to resist the insect's barbs. The bond with Vel beetles ensures that, despite this, the colony remains defended from large predators. The sting is still painful for adventurers to experience, though obviously risen ones are immune to pain, and lizard folk are resistant to the sting as well. Instead, this poison is used to paralyze other invertebrates, creatures without spines, the same size as the Vren. Dead insects are then brought to the colony and made into food or used to reinforce key chambers in the hive. As opportunistic decomposers, Vren can be found abuzz surrounding dead monsters, though they have competition in bloat kings who also prize rotted flesh. The sheer number of Vren means they often come out successful with giant meat chunks, even if they lose a handful to a bloat king. Vren are actively preyed upon solely by creeping toads, who hold invertebrates as their sole food source during their youth. When adults, though, creeping toads prefer more warm-blooded prey. Some Vren colonies have been found scorched and impaled by a sharp object, suggesting that manfishers hold disdain for the little insects. And finally, carnal wyverns. Wyvern! Corpse wyvern! Ready the ballista! Now, Orpheus, damn it, now! The town's guard on a very bad day for a wyvern to attack. Call signs. Nosebleeds, constant mind whispers, smell of curses, often described as vinegar, smell of necromancy, often described as posies, roars, described as 100 souls crying for help, clear visual presence, large number of other spawn in the area. Carnal wyverns are eldritch spawn of the West that can be found in any region. Carnal wyverns, also called corpse drakes, melders, hierophants, or sky terrors, can be seen flying through the skies, constantly searching for adventurers to consume. Carnal wyverns only hunt adventurers. I cannot stress this enough. If you see one, it's hunting for you and your party. Carnal wyverns can detect sapient thoughts, though they cannot precisely pinpoint them. To evade a carnal wyvern, focusing on deep breaths or delving underground will help lose the spawn's lock on you, though it's never certain it will leave. As true spawn, carnal wyverns do not need to eat, sleep, or drink to survive. They exist solely to incorporate more flesh into themselves and will not stop until utterly obliterated. Though they primarily hunt adventurers, carnal wyverns will not bypass significant amounts of biomass to absorb. Dead monsters of considerable size, such as an Orcanosaur, for instance, make for excellent supplements to a below-weight carnal wyvern. Dead creatures are resuscitated when absorbed, no matter how grievous the injury. If you've lost a fellow adventurer in the West, always burn their body if you cannot bring it with you, lest they may be awoken to a suffering without end. Visually, carnal wyverns are simply masses of combined flesh, the bodies of their victims. These souls are forced to remain attached to each other until the monstrosity is destroyed. Their thoughts are believed to mingle with one another, only being allowed to speak when the spawn roars, during which time pleas for mercy or screams of agony can be heard beneath the terrifying roar of the wyvern. The silhouettes of carnal wyverns can sometimes be mistaken for the real deal, making them one of two false wyverns, with the other being, of course, the plague wings. In combat against the carnal wyvern, holy magic and silver weapons work best to destroy the soul of the monstrosity. If felled thus, the souls within are allegedly freed from the deep. Though no study can support this, hope is better than the alternative reality. Avoiding the mouth of a carnal wyvern is key, as being swallowed is to be instantly assimilated, or rather it can be, as adventurer Gertz Ribmangler once clawed his way out of a carnal wyvern, suggesting mental or physical resilience can protect oneself. As stated above, carnal wyverns do not belong in the food chain. They only serve to disrupt it. Kill them if you are capable. Fear them if you are not. I was just talking about custom flora and fauna, and Predwin really is kind of our local master in that regard, I would say. Hopefully, I don't embarrass him by talking him up too much, but he is really great at this stuff. Really, really great at building out these biomes, and all three of these are super interesting. I love the little bees with the sort of oscillating mouths, kind of terrifying. Like, even if they're not dangerous, I don't want one near me. And I really, really like these carnal wyverns. I'm hoping I'm saying that. I hope it's not charnel, and I said it wrong the whole time. I went with my gut. You have told me how to pronounce this in the past, and I have forgotten. I do apologize, but these are great stuff as well. Very equally terrifying. Well, much more terrifying than the bees or the wren. Shrooms writes an untitled entry. A passage from the Magium Lexopendium, a compendium of magical theory for beginners written in Ostavica. This passage is from sorcery, specifically fauna and flora capable of magic. To call the Snilder a greater practitioner than most would be quite rude, but not incorrect. The humble Snilder, or colloquially known as the dust hog, is truly a remarkable animal. The Snilder, naturally, can harness and control the flow of mana using a specific set of olfactory organs to perform pteromancy. The Snilder has a highly complex nasal cavity with unique nose hairs. It uses these unique features to capture latent mana in the air it breathes and dust it sifts through. When searching for food, the Snilder prolapses its nostrils before then making small circular and undulating movements with its nostrils. Now, the hard-packed soil before them changes to soft, silty dust. The Snilder starts to dig through this dust, using its specialized mouthparts to sift through the dust for small animals, decaying plant matter, and detritus. Though relatively small in scale, pteromancy at any degree is quite a feat. Ostavican Trench, 114, Eastern Front. Private Falk stood at the ready for his turn at digging the trench. He drearily watched as an engineer brought a Snilder in a harness before the bare soil wall. The woman prodded the Snilder with a long instrument. The creature squealed before prolapsing its nasal cavity. The branching feather-like organs moved in a hypnotic manner as Falk watched the soil start to shift. Falk covered his mouth with a handkerchief as the firm dirt wall started to erode into fine dust. The Snilder was pushed forward, digging into the eroded soil, while Falk joined the beast, shoveling away dust, which soon coated every inch of his body. His eyes watered from the particles in the air, stinging them as the grit got between his teeth. The trench digging team made quick work of another 15 meters of raw trench within the 4 hours allotted to them under the cover of dark. Falk sat exhausted, his throat and mouth as dry and gritty as a desert. The engineer walked over, handing Falk his refilled canteen. The boy greedily drank the chalky water issued to him by the Ostivican army. He looked at the overworked Snilder, which barely moved after this shift, before pouring some of his limited water into his helmet. He brought the helmet now filled with water to the mouth of the beast. The Snilder looked at the offering for a moment before it began to guzzle down the grimy water. Falk couldn't help but laugh at the sight and the situation they both were in. Two overworked animals sitting in a trench, sharing some water. I like this little combination of giving us the details on the creature and then giving us a little bit of in-world context of how sapient people interact with it, utilize it in society, even if it's sadly abusive. I also don't think I've ever had to read the word prolapse this many times, and you know what? It's probably one of the better scenarios in which I would have to do that. For day 490, the prompt was, what person, company, service, etc. is notorious for being highly unreliable in your world? And this comes from ScrubsyBoy844 and the Discord. The Wanderer writes, Nazir Inc., an entry in Forest Kingdom. Rand looked down at his chart in disbelief. He was in charge of producing a high-end deep-sea submersible spacecraft, one that required a very specific space steel copper fusion. Normally, space steel would work well, but the copper fusion gave to superb weather resistance, making a very durable, extremely long-lasting, and weather-resistant material. Usually. See, he had tested each ingot from a random one of the crates. 84 of them had failed the stress test, out of 90. Rand checked the system again, made sure that the stress testers were set to the right parameter. Nothing was out of the ordinary. 12 months after they were supposed to have arrived initially, and now nearly all of them were brittle. Surely he had to have made a mistake. The Nazir Inc. commonly sold copper fusions to everyone, from the Starkling Empire, Sindiad, even the Fighting Kingdom. He tested the metal again. It further crumpled. He sent in the report about the metal, breathed deeply, as he considered if there was a way this wouldn't get him fired, made peace with his unemployment, and finally approached a communication terminal. He couldn't doubt it any longer. He had been sold inferior copper, and he was going to let this Nazir company know it. Thracia Nazir checked his inbox. He had gotten another message from someone named Rand Nani. It was a very long complaint, asking for a refund for inferior copper fusion space steel. Thracia looked at it for a moment, read it with amusement, and responded. Unfortunately, no. He sent it and saved it to his private domicile's archive. Nice. The unreliable copper merchant joke. A classic that none of us will ever understand. What a fun way to incorporate a joke, honestly. This is pretty well crafted, The Wonder. In the first half, I didn't know it was coming. I'm not going to lie. Carhop writes, The Tartan Hen Logging and Expeditionary Corps, an entry in Restris. Ashen Wolfbane Nas, Lodge Master of the Orawasho Grand Lodge. Calling that band of legalized brigands incompetent would be a kindness unearned. They've been as helpful as a snaring root in the middle of a chase every time I've had to work with them. Fumbling, ill-equipped, loud, yet somehow capable of securing contract after contract. If you ask me, that leader of theirs, Vassal Yu, has a fairy's tongue. I don't expect them to be but more than a nuisance for those cliff spider folks and their spelunking. That township on the border, however, should be wary. Something about the hen's increased activity in the woods around it portends trouble, I fear. The Tartan Hen Logging and Expeditionary Corps, the Hens for short, is a mercenary group based out of Cedra Stump, a logging town on the border between the Orawasho territory and Liberin. They claim to be the founders of the frontier's largest township, are known for their values of expediency and expansionism, and infamous for leaving places worse than they found them. Due to their status as a recognized mercenary company, they cannot be made exempt from any contract bid, a law which their current leader, Vassal Yu, takes full advantage of. Dracons flow like a river through the company's coffers despite a common, deep dissatisfaction with their work. Some folks believe there is more to the hens than meets the eye, claiming they operate in illicit trade and act as thugs and arsonists if a would-be patron snubs them for another company. Regardless of that claim's truth, their presence is keenly felt in the southern end of Orawasho. Originating as a logging guild whose membership was of questionable repute at best, the Tartan Hen Loggers were amongst the first batch of Liberinian settlers to head north under Vassal Menno's commission. The guild quickly gained a reputation for carelessness and speed, oftentimes leaving sites clear-cut and eliminating local populations of animals in them. Vosla dens were smoked out and harvested for unreported fur trading, elgir were hunted down for highly profitable antler powder, and many species of previously undiscovered birds were targeted for trophy sport and fletching. This brought the guild into conflict with the Ashen Lodge, who, after several skirmishes, were able to secure an uneasy agreement wherein all logging contracts had to be supervised by a lodge ranger. Eventually, after clearing the woods that would become Cedar Stump and helping to establish the town, Queen Dilmeter of the Peace sanctioned them as an official mercenary company under Vassal Minnow's charter. While this expanded the Corps' range of contracts, Dilmeter ensured that the Lodge's agreement would be upheld by writing into the Corps' charter a requirement for ranger presence at each contract the Corps takes. Part of this provision is a 20% cut of the contract's pay be given to the Lodge itself and another 5% to the ranger. As such, this has led to tension and minor hostility between the two groups. As of most recent times, the Tartan Hen has started to spend more of its resources on jobs in the woods surrounding Cedar Stump, often put up by mysterious patrons of little to no repute. The occasional cultist or wizard will hire them as well, ignorant or uncaring of their tendency to approach ruin delving with bombastic aplomb. Vassal Minnow continues to contract them for lumber in its rebuilding of its historic walls, with as many as a dozen timber barges starting their float down the Cedar Run in a day. The Ashen Lodge has lost several rangers on hen jobs lately, and those who return intact seem deeply disturbed by what they've seen in the forests and ruins, but cannot say why. All the while, Vassal has begun branching out into the mercantile field, selling a supposed miracle powder he claims to have derived from a newly discovered flower deep within the northernmost portions of the pitchbark. Great working in of politics here. That's definitely one of Carhop's strengths, is the sort of economic and societal politicking that goes on between things. The fact that you have a group that everyone kind of hates, but the legal system, the charters, how everything has come into being sort of unfortunately handicaps everyone in their ability to kind of oust these people that no one wants to work with. For day 491, the prompt was, what is an emerging field of study in your world? Who are some of its lead researchers? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. Bulbman 5000 writes, Scourge Duty. Despite the Scourge existing for 2,000 years, study of the legions of horrors is only about 60 years old. There are several reasons for this. Maybe panic about the beasts and their arrival, or perhaps simply recovering from the initial wave of disasters followed by trying to survive the beasts themselves. It doesn't particularly matter, for this burgeoning field of study is going almost nowhere. The closest any have ever come to discovering something new about the Scourge was the fact that Scourge monsters either fall apart and die, or inexplicably grow in strength when in captivity for long enough. The only other lead that has ever been found is a mystical tome that's been told to house boundless information about the Scourge, the Argent Lexicon. Legends tell of this book have gone far and wide, yet none have found the book itself. Interesting. Don't know much about these legions of horrors, but sounds like there's probably a good reason people haven't been trying to study them for a while. Hopefully they figure that out. For day 492, the prompt was, are there theories on the origin of a species or race in your world? And this came from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord. Carhop writes, Humanity's Dawn, an entry in Restris. Long has the origin of humanity been debated amongst the scholars of Restris, with two main conclusions being argued for. One side argues that humanity is of Pavonian origin, much like every other species that walks the plane. The others argue that humanity came with the Alavon, a stabilizing population bargained for by Heldis. There is great evidence for both sides to draw upon, like the great moonstone tablet depicted in the bard Silverfire's sketch, or the hymn of arrival, kept pristine under divine enchantment and spell-scribed glass kept at the grafted cathedral, written in the oldest version of the human tongue. While both sides of the debate rage on in essays, treatises, and amphitheaters, many other scholars find the question itself strange. Every other species has a mythology they claim as their definite origin, handed down by Heldis themselves, yet humanity has had no contact with the tongue of dagger and fable. Proponents of the Pavonian origin theory espouse that humanity was born from the bleeding heart of the iron rot, ran through by Heldus' spear in retaliation for its destruction of the shattered brother. Their main piece of evidence for this is the Great Moonstone Tablet at Dawnhallow. It depicts an ancient interpretation of the iron rod upright, proudly raining its lifeblood upon Terra while surrounded by the debris of its victim. Its 5-clawed hands are fully outstretched, accepting its fate. The blood which pours from its chest becomes red-haired humans which raise their arms in praise of the fallen Pavon. Researchers claim these figures must be humans, as other tablets theorized to be from this time depict other species by the inclusion of pointed ears and other signifying marks such as squat stature for the dwarves. They also point to the red hair on their heads, which is known to have been a prominent feature of the earliest humans based on other artwork and preserved remains. Dawnhallow itself is claimed to be the oldest known human civilization, which Vassalmena was built atop of. Proponents of this theory are largely occultists, frontier folk, and iron rot cultists. The Alavonian faith, especially the grafted cathedral, hold the previous view as heresy. They believe that humanity is a gift of the Alavon, a means to stabilize populations and bring Restris back from the brink of destruction through innovation and order. These theologians claim humanity's ability to crossbreed with the native peoples of Restris, the Korai, Korethi, Amaniaro, and Urexali, as proof of this claim, arguing that this flexibility of genetics saved population. The Hymn of Arrival, a tome spanning 800 pages of verse written in the ancient human tongue, is also used as proof, as it speaks of another world that the author spent their formative years in before being whisked away through a hallway of terrible light and sound, before arriving in a place they called Dawnhallow. Finally, they claim the architecture of Dawnhallow as their final piece of evidence. The architecture of that city is far unlike any other settlement of Pavonian origin and features engineering not found in contemporary ruins. Beyond clergy members, proponents of this theory tend to be First Kingdom loyalists, the Council of Mateno, and worshippers of both Prospera and Heldus. Though the truth may perhaps be found somewhere in the middle of these two theories, both sides can agree on one thing. Humanity's impact on Restris has been great, but whether that is for the world's benefit is yet to be seen. I think this is the most new thing for me personally from Carhop's world, the thing that I was most unfamiliar with, which was human origins being so disputed and honestly so interesting. Having a species that is literally viewed as a bit of a population saver because it can, I guess, mate with everything is kind of a fascinating take on humanity being in a very fantastical world with a lot of other much stranger races, and this argument between two very different origins is kind of cool, very compelling stuff. Kendamarania writes, School Dialogue, In the Origin of Demons, an entry in City of Woe. Mr. Helos. And then, after King Lucifer's excursion from Eden in 4004 BCE, he returned home victorious and had wedded the first woman of humanity, Lilith. The city of Pandemonium celebrated for 9 days and 9 nights until they learned that some amongst their ranks were turned into snakes, and all the food they ate tasted of bitter ash. Thankfully, the brave Lucifer devised a plan that... Zyro. God, can he get any slower? There's already 3 people asleep on their textbooks. Parsno. Hey, do you want to get into detention again? Zyro. All I'm saying is that it's weird that we begin the textbook with the war in heaven and not questioning the demons that already existed here. I mean, we're demons, right? Don't you think it's important that we learn about our own people? Parsno. What's there to know? We came first, the angels came second, and then the sinners came last when Cain died. Zyro. What's there to know? Frigging everything, obviously. We don't even have any solid ideas where demons come from in the first place. I mean, we know that we evolved from savage wild demons over God knows how many millennia, but then comes the question of who made us, if not God. Did we exist before Earth, before even heaven? Parsno. Whoa, you're getting ahead of yourself. I mean, true, there were pre-fall demons and all. How else would we exist, but not so much full-on civilizations? Zyro. Do you think we had no civilizations, or is it the school that makes you think? Parsno. Right. Zyro. Even so, it doesn't explain all the weird creatures that humans say they found on Earth. I was reading this transcribed textbook I saw in Treachery by some British human that described mammoth bones on Earth, even though they're supposed to be savage demons in hell. There's like 1,000 cases of our animals' bones being discovered by them, saying that they existed millions of years ago. Parsnell. So what if they managed to come up from hell? However they managed to do. Zyro. I was sort of thinking that they were rejected by God since they weren't created in Eden, especially since we don't share blood with those beings. Do you think God did the same for us too? The imps, mares, shades, theriocephaly, Lilithus, stuff like that? Parsnell. You're saying we're God's rejects? Zyro. I'm saying that we know definitively that we came first, before the angels and humans. If we came first, that means Lucifer overtook the pre-fall demons, even if we're native here. Parsnell. I don't follow what you're saying exactly. I mean, it doesn't explain how all of us managed to grow sentience independently from each other. We don't even know how old hell is either. If it was created by God or predates him in any way, for all we know, we could have existed for about 12,000 years, not millions, and it doesn't explain why civilization in hell didn't advance until the angels came, since we were tribes mostly. Zyro. And so what about civilization in hell? A lot of those records were destroyed or washed away when Lucifer came. I say it was to subjugate us into submission. Parsnell. It was pretty clear that the angels had no idea we existed anyways. If God is indeed all-loving, which can be argued against, he probably wouldn't reject us in the first place. Something clearly had to be wrong in our own creation for him to throw us into this pit. Maybe the same for humans and even angels as well? Since we're all equally screwed up in every shape and form. Mr. Helos. Hey, are you two talking again? You'll be staying after school chalking the board about no interrupting. Man, I was planning on going on a dinner date with my girl. Crap. Parsnell. Don't worry. It's only for an hour or so. I feel like the dialogue is a cool way that I'm noticing Kendamarania's improvement. One of the very first, if not the first thing I think Kendamarania ever shared with us on World Hammer was an early school dialogue, and the prose has really come a long way since then. It wasn't bad then, but it was just less practiced, and it's a lot cleaner, easier for me to read these days, and I'm impressed. I think that's really cool to get to notice. And as always, great discussion of exposition through a scene, which is kind of a useful way to get us invested in maybe a typically more nitty-gritty topic. For day 493, the prompt was, how is magic integrated in daily life in your world? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. The Wanderer writes, mages, an entry in Endrin. The village all prepared their best food. Tomorrow, a mage was coming into town, and they were ecstatic. For a town that had to deal with the drudgery of life, harvests, farming, rinse and repeat without much variation, mages visiting is usually a yearly highlight. Projects that are nearly impossible can be done in days, eternally burning torches to keep the village well lit, boots that will stay waterproof and not wear down, waterproof cloaks, mystical toys that float in the air, or simply a scholar who can read multiple languages. Furthermore, large projects like flattening out a large hill or fixing a collapsed mine. When a traveling mage wanders into town, spirits are always high. There's plenty of places, of course, that fear and despise mages, blaming them for past problems, but usually they economically suffer from their self-isolation. Sure, even people excited have a healthy fear of mages. Only mages really know what mages are capable of. Who knows if they can turn you into a frog, turn the town into a sandwich, or summon fire from the heavens to consume the village. The village prepared as tasty a food as they could. If the mage loved their food, they might choose to stick around longer. Typically, as long as there was money to be made, a pleasant environment, and good food, a mage is likely to stay indefinitely. That's usually how wizard towers get built. A mage finds a consistent income in a place they like. The village didn't expect that. Mages were expensive after all, but a few weeks was an achievable goal. The next day, the mage arrived. They wore an athal blue cape, a wide-brimmed, pointed blue hat, and very fancy clothes. Despite their long time traveling, the clothes were immaculately clean, not even a smidge of dirt on their boots. The village chief had to prevent the town from swarming the mysterious stranger. The mage got set up in the town hall and went outside. The town was waiting eagerly. Villagers had sold as much as they could to gather actual money. When the mage came out, nearly the whole village was waiting, many with their money and requests. The mage wouldn't have quite a lot of work to do and quite a lot of money to be made, and so the mage selected their tasks for the day, visiting the places they're there to work at. In this case, a collapsed mine, a broken ceiling, organizing and dating town paperwork, and enchanting at least a dozen different pairs of clothes. And by the end of the day, the town's copper mine was fully functional. The collapsed barn roof was mended, the town paperwork, the 5 books in common, were sorted and set in place, and most of the outdoor workers had a waterproof and cooling cloak. It's always really, really good to write stuff like this. I'm really happy with this prompt, actually. We've done stuff a little bit similar, but I feel like this one helped people try and ground magic in the world a little bit. And when you tell stuff in world from the perspective of the common folk, or at least the exposition surrounding the common folk about how life-changing or course-altering the little things like this can be, and I think that's kind of pivotal, and this is a great example of that. Bulbman 5000 writes, Daily life with magic. Magic in daily life is often used very specifically in terms of gemtech. As the technology relies on potentially volatile elementally charged gemstones, gemtech is used almost exclusively for the purpose of each machine. Maybe an oven, maybe simple heating, maybe a refrigerator, maybe transportation such as various forms of trains, it doesn't really matter. Now, magic in terms of mages, those who possess the ability to use magic, that is a very different story. Magic is a deeply personal force. Each element gravitates towards certain characteristics and behaviors. Magic can also shift within a mage should their behavior or their mental health change enough. Some fascinating examples are the elements of fire, nature, venom, and darkness. Many expect fire to be a force of pure rage and destruction, and it is absolutely capable of such, yet that isn't all it can do. Fire can also manifest like a hearth or campfire, a force to warm and bring comfort and joy to others. Venom is often seen as rather paradoxical, as the pure concept of being able to conjure dangerous chemicals and change their chemical composition has led many to think it is a force of pure malice, of violence and hate. And though it is capable of this, it also manifests in those wishing to protect something or someone. The spiritualists nicknamed it the Guardian's Might many centuries ago. Nature magic is another one many often are wrong about. Nature magic is a force of change, of evolution, of sustenance. As such, many users of the nature element tend to create gardens around them in one form or another. However, there is an inherent darker side of the nature element. As should the user feel neglected or even abused, the nature element becomes crueler. Roots stretch and become walls. Branches turn into barbed arms to defend the user. The nature element truly displays its user's mental state. And lastly is darkness, one of the most misunderstood elements by those without an academic knowledge of magic. Darkness can be a force of hunger, of ambition, and of hatred, but only through trauma can it be so twisted. In truth, darkness is the element of want, dreams, sleep, and the night. As such, it often emerges as the user's unconscious desire to seek something specific or to rest peacefully. As an old saying amongst the spiritualists goes, never forget a liar's light or the want of darkness. Now, I have been trying, more so this time, to pay attention to who has marked their entries with the CC tag in the Discord, meaning constructive criticism. I do not have time to go very in-depth on anything here, unfortunately, so I'll just try to point things out, and then people can ping me later if they feel like they didn't understand what I was saying. Overall, really like the back and forth of how is this thing misunderstood, how should it be more correctly understood is great. Now, there's just a little bit in the first paragraph that was confusing to read, and then there was a little section in the nature magic section that was a little strange, that felt off. So there's sentences in each of those paragraphs that I would recommend going back over, maybe read them aloud to yourself, and look at that for a potential edit. If that's not the kind of constructive criticism you're looking for, let me know. I can't give a whole lot when it comes to the general content or the world building itself. You could ask me for that outside of Worldhammer, though, and I would be very willing to go in more depth. Carhop writes, Folk Magic, an entry in Restris. The document itself appeared to also be named Frontier Magic. I'm not sure which Carhop really wanted this to be named, but they were different, and so I will give you both. The proper entry begins now. Orawasho Calling. Discoveries of the continent's last wild. Cove, Barrel, Silverfire, Alexis, University of Liberin, 890 PFB. But for the most part, for those in possession of the common persuasion and easiest paths of thinking, this remains true. The minutiae of reality are oft overlooked. Yet I posit that they are the ethereal thread from which our mortal tapestry is woven. This theory is observed in the development of frontier magic, called hedge magic or folk magic elsewhere, a practice that invokes the weakest of runes to affect the tapestry. This magic originates in the first generation of frontier communities and has been passed down by grandparents or elders. Oral histories of these communities points back to the Rubbleskin clan as the first ones to tap into its power, their matron having discovered the power in the runes of the, and, of, and is. These effects are typically benign, such as mending a broken post or kindling a cooking fire. Some can be used to inflict harm, while others can provide aid to the spirit. As of this current time, a few dozen of these chants are known, but it is believed by myself and my colleagues that other chants have yet to be observed or developed. In the centuries since the sack of the walls created a spanning frontier, this type of magic has been integrated into curricula at both the University of Liberin and the College of the Woven Aether. The more religiously devoted have long used a form of this magic in the speaking of quick prayers. It shall be interesting to see what folk magic will develop from the townships on the frontiers of the Morligdala Wood. Frontier magic is used by the working people living along the borders, frontiers, and ungoverned places every day. From bolstering their fortitude to quietly communicating across short distances, life among Restras's wild places demands the flexibility and adaptability these chants provide. Unlike fool chantings, which require drawing from the exhaustible wellspring of energy that fuels the self, these can be used almost without limit as they use the expelled breath as power. Despite this ease of casting, only a few of these chantings can be memorized and understood at once. Though they are simple runes, the, and, of, and is are still runes of power, and thus immensely dense in information. It is common for families on the frontier to exchange runic understandings as vows or gifts, ensuring each family has the robust tools it needs. It is popular among the younger generations to tattoo themselves with exchanged or gifted understandings from their closer relations which, if done with ink made from zygote fungus, charcoal, and the spinal fluid of a fairy, allows them to invoke its effect wordlessly. Scholars believe this to stem from these communities now living within proximity to the Korai, who have historically used a similar process to allow themselves the casting of more complex spells without the need for vocalization. I really want to know more about this rune setup and the runes of just these very simple words having, like, sort of, I would assume, very variable power. You have some kind of understanding about maybe how it imparts that power on something, maybe. There's a lot of gaps here that we don't understand that I'm sure Carhop has in his head that very much intrigue me. For day 494, the prompt was, how do sentient species with vastly different lifespans interact in your world? And this comes from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord. EclipsEternal writes, long live the Archon, an entry in Shattered Tale. As you may have noticed, the Archons lack proper names. This is not a mistake nor an act of laziness. The process of becoming an Archon is strenuous on the soul and mind. Corruption is a guarantee. If they don't forget their name during the corruption, they lose track of it over the centuries. Archons are effectively immortal, only capable of dying to another Archon, vessel, or god. The rise or fall of an Archon leaves drastic effects on the world. They are seen by the public as inhuman. The lucky ones are conscious enough to either wonder, death, stay out of the way, Oathborn, Frostborn, or in some cases, start a kingdom. The Hero, New Haven, and the Hive, the Citadel. These Archons are worshipped as gods. The unlucky ones become monsters. They forget who they are and attack without regard. Archon of Gravitos, Seraph. These are feared and often destroy several kingdoms before being destroyed. Their relics are sealed away. Death is a mercy to those unfortunate souls. This one also had the constructive criticism tag on it. I think the biggest thing that I would advise in this case is maybe give us just a little bit of a review on what an Archon is, because it's so easy to get lost in. Clearly, EclipsEternal has a great idea, and they're very fascinating. I remember you talking about them before. Some kind of powerful entities who are also in possession of some relic that gives them the power, and I'm not sure how those two are tied, but it'd be good to give us just a little, even if it's just a quick paragraph of what an Archon is woven in here somewhere, would be super beneficial to us getting it, right? Which we don't have to, obviously. Part of Worldhammer is we just read this stuff. That's fun. But that's the biggest thing I thought I could probably give as advice or as constructive criticism. Take it with a grain of salt, as you should anyone's. NYUX writes, big problems, big solutions. How does one make sense of stuff like age-based laws when different Lytians within the same species age vastly differently? It's simple, really. Every Lytian matures at the same relative rate, depending on their total lifespan estimate. These estimates vastly change depending on different factors like hybrids in Lytian species and such, but they can go anywhere from 80 to over 350. Because of the same maturing rate for everyone, let's say a Lytian at age 20 with a lifespan of 200 would be at the same physical, hormonal, and mental development stage of a 10-year-old. This means that all Lytians have two different ages, their true age and their legal age. Their legal age is what their relative age to a regular lifespan would be, and this is what determines their age for age-based laws and regulations. Because of this, and to avoid any shenanigans, the legal age of 20 is the age of consent. This also means that their perception of time is warped to fit their relative age range, but they still experience time at a normal pace, and the change is only retrospective, mentally. It's an interesting problem to solve, and I feel like I like this method of doing so. The sort of memory-based time dilation is super interesting, because you say they experience time at a normal pace and only changes in retrospective, but almost all of our experience is retrospective. So I wonder how much that changes. That's so interesting. Got me thinking on this one. The Wanderer writes, The Primordial King, an entry in Endrin. Pendria walked up the steps. There was only one person who was around long enough to answer her question. Anduin. Of course, as the king of the high court, he wouldn't have any time for a simple noble historian. Sure, she was an elf, which might grant her a little easier of a time, but this was Anduin, someone who was renowned from the old world, and as old of records as she could find about it, he was alive and strong. He was the father of the one who founded the Fire Elves, after all. For all she knew, he didn't have a beginning. She entered and sat in the section for the onlookers. The Council of Kings was in session. Every king from every notable nation was here. Anduin sat on his seat, poised with a kind of grace that only one who has seen countless ages could hold. The council was discussing whether or not the funmen should have their own lands. The line, "Why should they? They only live to be 5 years old, and they're weak enough any large foe could invade and take control of their lands." It was a human king who said that. Anduin rose to speak. Everyone stopped speaking to listen. Even those who didn't care about their own lands, let alone others, stopped when Anduin spoke. Only the truly insane wouldn't listen. "If this is the standard we're using, perhaps the elves should retake every land, again, save perhaps the giants," he said. "After all, there were very many times your people needed saving from the elves, and if we're talking about lifespans, well, a glass house is present there too." Everyone was outraged, besides some of the older, wiser rulers. Most of them started arguing at the idea of them losing their lands, but they missed two things. Firstly, the world if being present. Anduin didn't want their lands, and second, it was his decree that gave them those lands to begin with. If he wanted those lands, he wouldn't have given them away. When everyone settled down, it seemed in their outrage of his statement, the conversation had turned to less about the Funmen and more about why the elves should stay in their countries and not interfere. When they eventually circled back, evident that they wouldn't leave those lands alone willfully, so Anduin brought up the old council's first decision, the division of lands. One of the kings shouted out, "That agreement was made thousands of years ago. Why should it still be binding? Many of our kingdoms have fallen and risen again since then. Why should that law impose on us?" There was a murmur of agreement. Pendria smirked, in spite of herself. If the agreement fell through, their lands would belong to the elves again. Moreover, the giants would have no qualms expanding their borders, and they'd probably win. As the decisions wore on, boredom consumed nearly everyone. Pendria, Anduin, and the other elves in the area were pretty much the only ones who were not bored. After all, it was a terribly short portion of their lifespan, a blink of the eye compared to others such as the humans. At the end of the day, everyone gave up and decided to keep the old agreement. As everyone left, Pendria waited patiently outside the staircase. When Anduin walked down, a king alone without a bodyguard, not that he needed one, Pendria bowed and gave her petition. She asked for his wisdom, and to her surprise, asked her to rise and ask her questions. She asked, and he answered them all in full. Interesting little sort of meeting scene of all of these different groups. And yeah, giving us a nice quick snippet of how these lifespans sort of affect the way that different species and kingdoms interact with one another. I like it. For day 495, the prompt was, what are some common expressions/symbols of love in your world? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. Bulbman 5000 writes, Expressions of affections. Expressing love to one another is an expected part of any culture, and many of them have very different approaches. From the Uran, who tend to show affection by sparring with no protective gear, to the Fungora, who tidy up each other's living area and decorate said spaces to showcase how well they know each other, and many others. But even still, one variety of showcasing one's affections has been prevalent for any culture, and that is how one shows affections for a mage. For a mage, the expectation is to use an elemental gemstone that either matches or complements the mage's own magics. The part that truly shows how much the person cares is what the gemstone is placed within. Perhaps a weapon for a warrior, perhaps a trinket for the mage to hold on to. It doesn't matter. What matters is that the mage themselves knows that the other person made it with their love. At the same time, these practices also make attempts at deceiving all too easy to spot. Especially for a mage, for the ignorant can never truly replicate how loving it is to know someone so well that they know what attunes to them. So we're connecting the idea of attunement actually towards sort of affection and understanding, which I like. It's a cool way to spin some typical D&D stuff into your own world building, and then especially into this prompt is kind of fascinating. As for constructive criticism, this one was also marked. There's some roughness in the first paragraph especially. Nothing particularly stands out necessarily as wrong or problematic. It's just a little bit rough on the read. My best advice in these kind of scenarios is read it out loud to yourself. Go back over it. How can this prose be kind of just generally improved? And I'm sure you will be able to find it. If not, I'll happily point it out. And as always, take it with a grain of salt. Ed/Music Geekery writes, Expressions of affection/love. There are a few examples of expressions of love that I've played around with in Daystara. One of the most commonly known of is that of the supremely gentle yet sensual form found in Elseka, a nation whose form of greeting is a friendly touching of cheeks for those who appreciate physical contact, and for those who do not, they will make a love heart gesture. When expressing true intimacy with another, an Elsekan will touch the fingertips of their left hand to those of their beloved, and then their right palm over the other's heart, and speak the words, Anaresun, Heredre Inaresun. My heart recognizes your heart. This is held for a full minute, whilst the lovers feel each other's heartbeat, letting each other feel the true vulnerability and closeness in each other. In Solarinia, there are many expressions of love relevant to the element the individual might be tied to. To the Rosions, the people of the Earth Kingdom, it is through particular dances, as they are deeply connected to the vibrations that others make with their footsteps, and so through dance they can truly feel the vibrations of the one they love. To the Fralians, those of the Fire Kingdom, true romantic feelings can manifest physically. When one of them is truly in love, they can speak the other's name in flames. Some have used this as a way of creating wild and vibrant displays of elaborate fire breathing to show how much in love they are. To the Water Kingdom of Zanara, love can be expressed in as many varieties as there are bodies of water and manners in which it flows, but a universal constant is that when courting is initiated, the courter will step back and bend the knee to the courted as though to represent the way a river might flow into the sea. Note, I kept trying to think of one for the Wind Nation, Keastra, but I didn't enjoy what was coming out, so I decided to forego it until I have something that sits right. The lightning tribes of Vilama, love is considered a vital, amazing, once-in-a-lifetime spark, and so to represent this to their lover, they will go out during lightning storms, lying in wait to catch lightning in a bottle to present to their beloved. Whilst lightning catching is a common ritual game for the lightning tribes, those who do so for this gift will not only eschew the wearing of anything protective, they will in fact garb themselves in full metal armor as though to represent their open willingness to fall completely in love. Amazingly, so far only twice has this insane behavior resulted in death. Once was because the individual had a whole Gothian frog in his pouch, a creature infamous for drawing bad luck, and the second time because too many people were trying to catch lightning at once and she got crushed by the dog pile. Still working out what many of the other nations would do, very much open to suggestions. For context, they would be ice, magma, smoke, mud, radiance, salt, ash, dust, gem/minerals, and steam. Throughout the major courts of Solarinia, and even several of the minor ones, particularly the Gem Kingdom of Crystallosia, it is a common practice for individuals to exchange promise rings, even prior to engagement, if they are so dedicated to each other that they do not see themselves ever parting. These rings are specially enchanted so that the pair can always know if they are safe or not. For some especially connected, it can also confer to the other individual skills and abilities they might not otherwise have. Most notably, this resulted in the famous Frostfire dance that Prince Ifrit of Ifral and Lady Lahumi of Kulmazan shared, said dance seeing the pair defy gravity as they danced upon wisps of flame and diamond dust ice. I didn't realize there were so many nations, all based off these different elements. Kind of a really fun founding concept for a world. I like this. Maybe this is something you have discussed before, Geekery, but I just maybe had not latched onto it, but I really like that. And I like the coverage you have so far. It's a lot of different places to cover. And if you want to get really deep in the weeds, then lots of places will have overlap depending on, who has interacted with who and such, but great start to all of this. Carhop writes, Denia vows an entry in Restris. Carhop notes at the top, content warning, mentions of the concept of spousal abuse. This one's best read while listening to your favorite Breaking Benjamin song. I recommend Evil Angel. Jokes aside, this prompt response really says a lot about how I feel about the concepts of love and marriage, which isn't something I've written out since getting divorced. This has been helpful. Thank you to the prompt writer. The proper entry begins now. Words for the Weary, a collection of letters to and from the front lines of the First War, organized by Alexis Silverfire, 18 Suns Reign 890 to present. Dilmeter Museum of Anthropology, University of Liberin, Vassalmeno Campus, Vassalmeno. Excerpt of a letter found tucked into a wallkeeper's shirt pocket. Not only but 8 hours has passed since you answered our Lord Ryson's call, and I am already stricken with grief immeasurable. My heart shall shrivel and rot, I fear, without mine companion's persistent radiance of character and temperament. Mother says the sun must give way to the moons, but what of those of us who wish to dance in sunlight everlasting? Your light shall not dip below the horizon. I pray to all the gods and powers, lest I follow in step. Denia, whose domain encompasses love and lovers, is invoked among the Alvonian faithful in the joining together of couples in marriage. While ceremonies can tend towards grandiose or humble, depending on the temple a couple is avowed in, a number of other factors such as wealth and status, they all end with the couple exchanging Denia vows. These vows are normally whispered to one another while both members hold ceremonial daggers to each other's throats, symbolizing the power each has over the other. The vows are sealed in blood with the couple exchanging a light cut to the center of their dominant hand's palm. They then clasp cut hands, dip them into a basin of blessed water, and join the Denia tryst keeper in a prayer of devotion and offering as the wounds rapidly scarify. Through this, the magics of Denia enter the scar tissue and settle into each person's essence. The keeping of a Denia vow bodes well for its holders, and in turn, the breaking of one is devastation. A couple who maintains their vows often lives longer, with the vow itself curing wounds and curing minor illnesses in response to its maintenance. When a member of the couple does something exceptionally in line with their vows, they are granted a feeling of immense temporary bliss. Depending on the desires of the couple, a Denia vow's upholding can also boost their fertility, especially when both are doing so exceptionally. However, when one or both members of the couple work against their vows, the offender feels a sharp and intense searing pain along their vow scar. In especially egregious cases, the offender may be momentarily paralyzed by the pain. In instances where both parties are actively breaking their vow scars rend themselves open, and the essence of Denia escapes them, ending their marriage with the ghost of a scar on each of their palms. Transgressions at this level can be absolved at the temple, but oftentimes tryst keepers will turn these couples away, as they feel the poison of resentment has ingrained itself too deeply in their hearts. In the worst of cases where abuse is involved in any manner, the Denia essence will inflict similar suffering on the abuser tenfold before escaping the abuser and flowing into the abused, flooding their senses with euphoria while teleporting them to the nearest Denian temple. One is not necessary to go into the gory details of it all. A future spouse can be assured that physical harm will be met with agony or death, while emotional harm will lead to the other's psyche becoming tortured and desolate. Man, I can definitely tell that there is some heaviness behind this, and it is a really pretty picture of an idea that would be kind of amazing. You get all kinds of images of people potentially trying to circumnavigate the Denia vow if they have any kind of potentially untoward tendencies or premeditations. But you also get this picture of Anyone who understands the vow properly and is taking it is probably going to be a really good person to be with, which I think is kind of the whole point here, an almost extreme version of real world marriage vows. The idea that truly understanding them and doing them should grant you someone you would want to be with forever. But otherwise, there's a scar left behind it. It's a beautiful and definitely also sorrowful piece. But I appreciate that you shared it with us, Carhop. For day 496, the prompt was, what modern technology would people of the world's past find most fascinating or terrifying? And this comes from Scrubsy Boy 844 in the Discord. Kendamarania writes, Horrors of the Metanet, an entry in Sanchikoku 2065. The Metanet is, by all accounts of the definition, a miracle of new technology. Developed by Iris and Cornea to replace the bombed old internet using scraps of its data, it has a wide variety of uses including simple texting, calling, and data transfer, a fully virtual simulation of Sanchikoku at its upper levels, and hacking and infiltration used by cruisers and their viruses. However, there are layers upon layers in the Metanet simulation, requiring years of mental training and cryo-freezing the body to delve into its rabbit hole. The deepest parts of the Metanet can only be described as an abstract collection of data, bytes, and files from the depths of Silicon Valley's servers. One must tread carefully when exploring the deep Metanet, as it's a wasteland of rogue viruses and digital ghosts of residents dead from final hour, whose existence remains only in a digital realm. Prolonged exposure to the deep Metanet can lead to synapse overheating and cyberpsychosis, as well as melting the mind and trapping a cruiser in the net. Occasionally, cruisers will delve into the deep Metanet to retrieve old, pre-hour data directly, although not many return from the bottom layer unscathed. Others will purposefully get trapped in the deep parts for long periods of time for religious observances, such as for the Netian Grove and the Fifth Eyes cruisers. Older generations of Sanchikoku residents feel as if the Metanet itself is akin to an eldritch being, with his own mind from decades of experimentation by Iris and Cornea. I mean, this makes a lot of sense. Internet, and then you go internet squared, or whatever you want to call something like the Metanet, would be pretty terrifying for, I think, even people of our current age. I think if you describe something like the Metanet and like it was real, or you had to experience the Metanet as something real, as someone from the information age, I think you would be sort of terrified. Or fascinated, or both. Nugget writes, Welcome to the Internet, an entry in Time Traveler and the Immortal. Victor was left unsupervised, and he decided that the best use of his day was going around Emrys's bookshop to look at the random things he had. He spent some time in the kitchen, admiring a strange metal box that had a lever to turn it on. The interior of it glowed red and hot, a tested fact his fingertips were still burned, and he continued to watch intently as it softly clicked, and softly clicked, and softly clicked. It was like a clock in a way, though the accent was so thick it was basically a different dialect. What was it trying to... Ding! The interior shot up, and Victor instinctively jumped back like a startled cat. He stared at the strange contraption before approaching it once again and slowly lowering the lever once again to watch. After he got bored of that, he found it, a large, clunky, glowing box on a desk. There was a flat typewriter below it and a strange oval next to it. Victor sat down. The typewriter was not connected to anything else that would be included in a typewriter, but had a wire connecting it to the glowing box. He pressed space. The glowing box shifted, displaying the name Emrys Aurelius, before opening to a new screen with a box saying, Search. He looked down at the typewriter again, then back up at the glowing box and began to type. And continued to type. For everything he types resulted in pages upon pages of information about everything he could ever want to know. The workings of a toaster, the history of the Industrial Revolution and its effects on modern day, cat videos, an odd sort of site regarding the number 34 that he didn't entirely understand, videos on this strange in-between dimension known as the World Hammer, and eventually... Victor Cogwin, he typed into the search bar. A few articles came up. A Wikipedia page, documenting things about his life, his childhood, his relationship with his father, his expulsion, how he died at the age of 23 from killing himself. He found old photographs of himself, usually with his family, but a few from his time at the university. He found sketchier sources comparing some of these photographs to paintings Amherst had done during the 1500s, recognizing him based on his attire or the white streak in his hair, people questioning if there was any connection between them. And then he found a blog of sorts from a historian, an actual historian this time, though Victor was confused about it being a woman, since when were they allowed to go to university? The blog was about him, however, an entire page about him, his childhood, his mental problems, how he certainly had something called autism and depression, but didn't have words for them, which was absolutely correct. He had no idea what these words meant. She went into his inventions. She went into how they were stolen after his death. She looked at the structure of them, how they worked, how they paved the way to the world we now know, even if not under his name. She went into the light bulb, the automobile, his obsession with clocks, and his studies of time. Victor could feel tears well in his eyes the further he read. That someone out there remembered him even centuries later. At the bottom of the page was her thesis, about how Victor Cogwin was a genius before his time, and that it was his innovations and technology that forged the modern world, but that he ended it before he could see the worth of his work in himself. Below that was some notes, including a symbol next to the words, "Contact me." He clicked it. As he wrote in the strange box, he was approached by Emrys. "Good evening, Victor. I see you've discovered what a computer is." "Oh, is that what this is?" Victor exclaimed. "It's actually quite fascinating. Hey, did you know that the Earth is actually flat?" Emrys unplugged the glowing box. "Yep, that's enough internet access for you." This is really sweet, actually. A nice respite from a lot of the sorrow we get in a lot of Nugget's entries. Victor gets a little moment of recognition, a little moment of validation, and via the internet of all things. It's quite the two-sided coin, I suppose. Now, I know Nugget also actually adds the constructive criticism tag on this. I'm trying to think of some of the advice that I would give or some of the criticism that I would give. There's some really simple spelling mistakes in here. Those aren't too useful as a constructive criticism, just something to look out for. I think I did really enjoy the descriptions of the computer. I think we could have gone a little deeper on confusion from Victor with the internet and the computer's use. I know that would stretch the entry out, but I think that's something I would like to see in something like this in the future. Victor definitely feels like he's a little too handy with the technology, but I don't know. That also could be part of Victor's character as an inventor is fast adaptation. Would not surprise me as someone who's time traveling, but that's the thing that stuck out to me. For day 497, the prompt was, what does architecture look like in your world/culture? And this comes from XR Sharp Razor in the Discord. I'm Crab174 writes, architecture. The architecture in my world very much differs from race to race. The dwarves incorporate lava into literally every building they make, creating large, sharp, imposing structures to call home. Their most notable structures are bastions. Bastions are their place of worship, huge temples with lava flowing down the sides. Merfolk take inspiration from Greek architecture and the legend of Atlantis, giant columns, underwater cities, bubble domes. Elves go for fancy English architecture, incorporating trees and leaf designs as well as light and holy motifs. Humans have no specific kind of style, as they tend to inhabit the kingdoms of past races, but the large human population of Aethervale makes it worthy to note the city's steampunk Victorian-era style. The entire city is built on giant cogs, so sections can be rotated around and change in orientation. The Serpentine have Western/Egyptian/Middle East-inspired architecture, not much else to say about them. Neotopia is the literal representation of a cyberpunk city, towering skyscrapers, neon lights, the works. In the future, when Monarch takes over, almost the whole world adopts Neotopia's style, save for a few traditional villages. This one had the constructive criticism tag on it. Hard to do too much of that on a lot of these shorter entries. I think maybe the most obvious here is that you could definitely go in a lot deeper on some of these. The thing that maybe I would work out the most or try to think on the most is historical reasons for the way in which a culture comes about to create their architecture, why their style comes out of their history. It's a tough thing, though, to be fair. That is not an easy thing to do, and it's not something that I am even currently doing. But All of these are currently really shallow, which they have to start that way. Look into some of them and figure out why would this group do this thing. Now, I think you've probably already done that for the dwarves, which is maybe the most compelling one here. And that's the one I would point at and say, that's really cool. Really like that. It already evokes a lot to me. Bulbman 5000 writes, Architecture of the Nations. The different civilizations have wildly varying styles of architecture relating to where exactly they dwell. The Vapira have used bricks made from mud and clay to build their houses as they lived on the fringes of a desert for ages. The houses, like many, lacked a great deal of decoration as the Vapira were attempting to simply survive the scourge. The Uron also used the mud of their marshland home to build their houses, while also using cut-apart trees as an interior support system. This proved sufficient in time. That was until their homeland was besieged by Scourge. Then, after time, gathering from their quarries, they learned to build great walls of stone bricks. The Fungora are perhaps the oddest of the races on this front, as they used nature magic to mold trees of various sizes to make them into buildings for their people and their needs. Few have figured out how to copy their methods. The Cathar Empire is probably the most unpleasant of the bunch, with great towers of steel and machinery standing so tall they cast shadows over the people below. On the ground level, the Empire uses concrete for every single one of its roads, leaving next to no room for nature to blossom, a reality that its nobility and a previous emperor intended. Loran was also similar to this, with buildings and walls of stone bricks and streets of cobblestone. Loran stands now as a gray monolith. Long ago, it was colorful, as its people used all sorts of paints and handcrafted decorations, but those burned or decayed in time. Xanaheim, years after, would go on to mimic Loran with its own capital of stone brick and cobblestone, ironic that they shared a fate. Bulbman also tagged this with constructive criticism, and I feel like there's a bit of an opposite problem to the previous prompt, which is that we actually get some great descriptions of why things are built a certain way. But we actually don't get that much about architecture. We're getting a lot more about the materials used and how that has affected, a final look. But there's a lot missing in terms of the structure, the architectural design, I guess you could say. I know that all of these elements are part of architecture, but it feels like we're missing a big key component of architecture, which is the things that are done that are unnecessary. NYUX writes, dystopian, but pretty. Everything from the sleek and fluid design of the uptown areas to the ruins of the outskirts, Xandra has it all in terms of architecture. The one thing that does connect all is the fact that the amount of space in one's living area is how wealthy they are, and the usage of exclusively non-organic building materials. The larger and more space-inefficient the furniture, the higher the status symbol. The more architecturally defined areas are the uptown ones, with there being strict regulations for what can and cannot be built. Within the uptown areas, architecture is heavily focused on large living spaces and beautiful appearances. A strong white stone/metal-like material is used for almost all structures, with, often colored, large windows everywhere possible. Nature and greenery is also seen as an important part of design, with the majority of otherwise wasted surface area being used for greenery. This has resulted in the most common servant position to be a gardener, ahead of cleaners. Travel routes are vehicle-focused, with the majority of walkable routes being exclusively servants' underground road network. Living spaces are most commonly large and tall, with the higher up the space is in a given building, the larger it is. Everything is designed with lighter, majority-colored materials in mind, with colored/dark accents to maintain a sense of cleanliness. Water elements are also very popular, but there aren't any guidelines regarding them currently. Having private and public servants is the norm, with them most often being confined to their dedicated spaces/routes, unless they're personal servants. All structures are built to accommodate this, with their own living areas being confided in their own floors, mostly underground. Their living spaces are mostly common areas and private sleeping capsules, but that entirely depends on the value of each servant. Only a few physical stores are available to the public, since ordering what you need is the norm. The majority of stores are underground, within the servants' roads, to make their deliveries more efficient. Public spaces are designed to be as naturally lit as possible, since they don't require lights at night due to the faction-wide curfew. The high-end neighborhoods are the ones with the tallest buildings, which are all connected with skywalks and other buildings, creating a second ground floor at the top. The people who live at the top have everything they could need at the same level, so they don't need to go down to the ground level. These elite living areas have their own economy and laws, not on paper, with them being the only areas, that are enforced by laws, that aren't affected by the curfew. They're designed to be majority walkable and more communal in general, with parks and community areas. They have a very busy nightlife, with countless highest-end social places like restaurants and clubs being widely available and open constantly. All buildings are shielded by a central machine that protects the structures from disasters and threats with an invisible but powerful arcane shield. With everything within the faction being powered by steam from heating arcane crystals, that said steam is also used as a light source. The steam glows brightly, depending on the type, color, of the crystal, with the glow being bright enough to light up a room. While everything is built around visible, transparent power cables lighting up everything, the uptown areas take their concept to a whole other level. The cables are often turned into artwork and geometric shapes to create intrigue in plain places, with them wrapping around built-in furniture and architectural elements. This design principle is also why everything is so organically shaped, as to allow these tubes to flow with them. This extravaganza does mean that the majority of the faction's power does go into the uptown areas, but this is being balanced by the complete lack of external power being sent to the outskirts. Really like a lot of the little details here. Super interesting stuff. I know we're talking about architecture, but really the thing I think that fascinated me the most was this idea of the underground servant roadways in the uptown. That is very compelling to me. This like nightlife that is literally submersed below the town's like top street level that exists kind of solely for the wealthier upper class. It's just really kind of fascinating. It's a really well delivered concept. Kendamarania writes, Architectural History of Corpi, an entry in City of Woe. Heresy. Many of the buildings in Heresy differ heavily from the rest of Corpi from its architecture. The building above, for example, is located in Little Deneb, in one of its many ethnic enclaves, with Denebian roof styles with ornamental ridges resembling Denebian temples, while many only serve as commercial or residential buildings. In addition, many of the smokestacks that let out smoke from the burning heretics underground would be redecorated to fit. Many ethnic neighborhoods employed this strategy of restyling buildings to resemble exaggerated versions of their culture. The idea was that due to the aesthetic appeal of bringing in tourists and visitors and providing extreme economic output to the city, the neighborhood would not risk gentrification or relocation due to xenophobia and perceived crime rates, especially during the 1900s when xenophobia was at an all-time high. While it worked, it ironically began to drive residents out due to over-tourism. Real-life inspirations: Chinatown, San Francisco, California; Little Italy, New York City; International District, Seattle, Washington. Wrath. Due to urban decay and deindustrialization, many of the buildings constructed during the 1880s and 1890s were left to rot due to neglect by urban planners in the Ars Goetia, as well as a declining population moving to other parts of the city. Torn paint and exposed brick and foundation serve as a grim reminder towards the neglect for Wrath, with its remaining population struggling. In addition, power lines cover the borough to spread to all corners of Corpi, adding additional hazard to the remaining residents. Real-life inspirations: various neighborhoods in Detroit, Michigan. Lust. Once an architectural cornerstone for the city, now considered by many to be a stain on Corpi's history, and others a fun, provocative borough to travel and live in. Following the Great Carpathian Fire of 1866, much of the rubble following became a breeding ground for new styles, away from the old regime. The most popular of these was dubbed Republican style, featuring elaborate trims and bay windows drawn from architecture from nearby Malafern. With the rise of prostitution within Lust, old buildings became repurposed from its residential use as commercial buildings for inns, hotels, and clubs, featuring large neon signs and succubi advertising themselves behind the windows. In addition, some opt to repurpose the roofs and walls of houses to include spikes and stakes in the hopes of catching falling lustful sinners and selling their organs on the black market. Real-life inspirations: Der Wallen, Amsterdam, the Netherlands; the Tenderloin, San Francisco. Gluttony. With a large swarm population as well as freed sinners, Gluttony is one of the most populous boroughs in all of Corpi. To compensate, urban planners and architects sought to build some of the cheapest housing they could make within reason during the 1910s, with no features except solid bricks, concrete, and box-like structures, being able to house hundreds of people. However, Once the city's economy began to plummet due to overpopulation and with the start of the Sinners' War, tenants began to use the large spaces and roofs to make urban gardens, with similar punishments to how it works out in Limbo. Bringing in hellhounds, they would tear apart tormented sinners and use their flesh to fertilize otherwise poor coastal soil. The urban gardens of Gluttony became central to keeping Corpi's population fed during and after the war, as well as adding economic value to the borough at the expense of torturing sinners. Real-life inspirations: Queensbridge, New York City, New York. I love that I get an almost video game map image of the differences between these places. I can imagine walking through one borough into the next and seeing the alterations, the changes in the architecture happen in real time as the differences in the subcultures of Corpi reveal themselves. It makes for some really, really immersive stuff. It's a really, really good job. For day 498, the prompt was, what is a common children's game in your world? And this comes from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord. Kendamarania writes, Snarrigan Games, an entry in Return to Faelund. Pretend play and role-playing is deeply important for Snarrigan children, especially since their villages have been under lockdown and isolation since the end of the Long Fog. While older generations of Snargs have been content with keeping to themselves in the quiet, simple rural life, newer generations born after the war have had an insatiable thirst to explore the outside world and witness things they've only heard about in stories, like great herds of unicorns or majestic gear whizzes flying through the air. Still, they feared the wild witches who rode out in the land, as well as the exaggerated tales of the outside that the village elders would spin. To compensate, many children throughout Snurg County devised elaborate games of pretend. These usually ranged from battle reenactments using flails and pitchforks to recreations of the epic quests gone on by the humans Jackie and Lizel, where their adventures can take them across their walled villages. Occasionally, magic itself will play with the Snurgan children, glamoring their eyes with illusions of greater Faelund. It can play rough with the children, too, transporting their minds to traumatic memories of the land's history, like the sacking of Hjoselfam, but is otherwise benign. I really like that Kendamarania always sneaks in that magic's interaction. Magic is always present in the Return to Faelund setting. It's always there, even if it's a little thing, and it's always having some kind of impact on whatever world building is being done. I think that's smart. Probably the Great writes, Skip, an entry in Tales from the Pit. The Pit. I see it all the time. Kiddos playing near those haunted vistas. I don't really know the rules, though. Seems abnormally complex for a children's game. Our protagonist, Eli Rhodes, looks up from his desk to his pal speaking up from the silence. What hell are you talking about, Mark? Skip? The kids' game they play in the Wretchways. I see it every time I'm on my way here. You've never seen it? Mark tips his hat up as he swirls the whiskey in his glass. Is that the one where someone's a dog and everyone else has to guess who? No, wait, that's just dogs, isn't it? Rhodes, come on, man, seriously? It's the one where, I can't think right. Mark rubs his temple. He is several glasses deep. Perhaps he should cut back a little. Mark, I'm sorry, but I don't have a single clue in the slightest as to what you're talking about. That look on your face says, mother of all hangovers tomorrow. Maybe cut back a little? Rhodes looks back down to his paperwork and string theories, putting the thought of Mark watching kids play in the street long enough to know some of the rules out of his head. Maybe don't go around watching kids wearing clothes like yours, idiot. Folk might accuse you of stuff you don't want on your record. Mark pauses for a moment, thinking. It's the one where they draw some sigils on the ground with a lady script. I think it's meant to emulate some sort of ascension ritual. Rhodes drops his pen down in a huff, looking back up to his associate with his one good eye. Okay, fine, I'll bite. What in the pit does this have to do with anything at all I'm working on right now? Rhodes taps his finger down on his desk, sending rippling waves through his own glass of whiskey that Mark poured hours ago, still untouched. I'm real busy, you know. This psycho ain't gonna... Yeah. Mark waves his free hand at Rhodes dismissively. He sets his empty glass down on the table and releases the lid from the bottle, leaning forward to pour another round for himself. Call it a hunch, okay? They started playing it around the same time the murders started happening. I know that can't be a coincidence. We both know this. Thing doesn't exactly play by our rules of reality, right? Maybe it's using the kids for something. A ritual has power, no matter who starts it. Rhodes' jaw opens slightly as he baffles at the complexity of this drunkard's words. First, it's a person, not some horror beyond us. How fantastical do you think this psychopath is, really? Second, you said that the writing was the lady's script, so wouldn't that rule out anything occultist? I'm not chasing a monster, just a man with a sick, albeit conniving mind. Rhodes straightens up to try and meet Mark by the eye, but he was far too short to even dream of such. This drunk freak is the tallest around for miles, maybe even the whole of the pit, and he has the muscles to match. You'll have to convince me before I go around interrogating 8-year-old kids. Mark sighs deeply before swigging down more liquid happiness. Okay, so you're going to disregard that it's still conveniently timed for when these killings started happening. What about the fact that all of these games are done outside buildings that have gone to the dogs? Nothing good happens to kids that hang out near those shitholes. Rhodes nods his head. To this point, it's a non-zero chance Mark is onto something here. Certainly worth at least talking to some parents in the Wretchways. Fine. Finish off that bottle you're violating and we can head out after you vomit it all down my toilet for the umpteenth time. Mark looks appalled at Rhodes' words. That's been way more than that. The two investigators laugh between each other as they head out the door, guns in coat, notepads in hand. This is fun. I went for, a bit of the C kind of accent for this. Felt right. A bit of a gumshoe, stereotypical noir style, which, if that's not what you're thinking on this Predwin, let me know, but it definitely gives that vibe. And I had a lot of fun reading this. Some really great back and forth. Good. I like the choice of the construction of this prose a lot, actually, with the sort of narrator kind of feeling a little bit like a separated entity from the rest of the third person prose. The narrator, in the italics and stuff. It's kind of interesting. I like this formatting a lot. Bultmann writes, A Ruined Kingdom. The champions searched through the ruins of Loran, buildings broken and charred, each of them focusing on something different. Xerez sees clear footprints burned into the stone walkways. Byreth finds broken weapons strewn about the ruins. Orvis examines the patterns of how the stone and wood was charred. Zorn looks upon the charred bones and struggles to not contemplate how many families died to the Sinner Dragon's arrogance. Artem looks from above the taller buildings, positioned at their peak like the sniper the others know her as. Nari sees the furniture, the burned wardrobes and charred tables, and feels only sadness for what was. Rigda, ever the curious engineer, examines the remnants of old Gemtech, and then there's Frapoko, who yelps after stepping on something. He crouches down, the young dragon staring intently at whatever he stepped on. A metal piece, looking like a soldier. Then he looks and notices a board of wood next to the soldier piece on the stone floor. Hey, guys, he calls as the others come to him. Look what I found. Frapoko says as he gestures to the piece, there's actually quite a few of them. Zorn says as she looks at the floor as well. Do you guys think these were... Zorn is cut off by Nari, her tone dense with her growing depression at seeing these ruins. Toys, games, maybe, she says with her sorrowful tone. I've seen a lot of them. Whatever these were, they were popular. Maybe with children, maybe with adults, Artem says as she trails off, looking at the gray stone ruins of Loran. Think we'll ever find out? Byreth asks as she looks at the broken apart toys. Maybe not. I just wish more of this place survived, Orvis says, with a tone building in sadness as he thinks about their chances of learning of Loran's culture in detail. The heroes move on, all of them finding it even harder to not think about how many died in this ruined land. Kind of a cool look. I like this at, missing history. The histories of children once playing, devastated by a time long ago. The actions of one powerful individual, have these circumstantial reverberations that hurt many. In terms of constructive criticism, since this one was tagged, I would say definitely look into separating out different participants in dialogue into new paragraphs. The best way to know how to do this, I think, is just to read some dialogue from bigger writers, from famous writers, or just from well-known books, and you'll kind of get the patterns down, because it is very hard to keep track of which voice is which when one paragraph contains more than two voices, or more than one even, really. And some of these had 3 or 4. So that's a really good thing to make your stuff more readable by anyone. And then especially if you want me to be able to keep track of voices more, that's going to help me a lot. For day 499, the prompt was, what is a field of study that has been abruptly halted in your world? Why? And this comes from the Wanderer in the Discord. Bullman 5000 writes, study of the flesh. The Scourge is not the only force upon Seroth that has threatened all life. Another rose from a now destroyed nation 600 years into the age of the Scourge. This force of cruelty and violence is called the Malignance. The Malignance is a mystery to many, a flesh that appears sentient and seeks to subsume all that lives in its path. The spiritualists proclaimed it as an enemy to life itself, a threat that could be as vile and apocalyptic as the Scourge should it be allowed to thrive. But many scientists were still curious about it and captured tiny pieces of Mother Seroth's living wound, all for study. This study of the Malignance, however, was quickly cut short after an incident where a settlement was almost consumed by it. Now none dare try to study it, only destroy it with the same viciousness as many already do the Scourge. I like that there's kind of these competing weird organic entities that are both kind of mold, like gross, fleshy mold stuff, both very Resident Evil. Again, Bowman has also put constructive criticism, I think, on all of their posts. This one, I think, is a little too short for me to do much with, though, so I will just say that I did enjoy this, and I like the concept. EclipsEternal writes, Alchemy of Old, an entry in Shattered Tale. All magic stems from the 16 seats of power on the Pantheon. During the Great War, the power of the Pantheon shifted drastically. Seat number 3, Material Magic, Gods, Kim and Nova. Kim was the goddess of alchemy. She was worshipped greatly across the world, and her power allowed the people to prosper. She fell during the Great War to the hands of Gravitos. When Kim fell, alchemy ceased to exist. Relics of immense power became mundane. However, like all dead gods, she left an ancient class relic in her wake, a philosopher's stone capable of infinite transmutation. This relic remains the sole remnants of alchemy and is only capable of being used by an Archon of Kim. Many decades later, a new goddess rose to fill the 3rd seat. Alchemy was still lost, but in return came creation magic. This goddess was Nova, with the domain of creation. Her power stems from using mana to generate material. It is costly and taxing on the user. She's often overlooked and forgotten because she doesn't have the same level of power as what Kim once had. Okay, after reading the whole thing, I kind of got the beginning. The only constructive criticism, because this one was tagged, would be that the beginning was a little bit rough on the mind. Like that paragraph pivot to the seat number 3 situation was confusing at first, but then as I read the whole thing, I kind of grasped it, and I think it is fine. I really like this idea of something going away when that god is gone. So you lose alchemy, but you get just a little piece of it. That's maybe the most powerful possible piece, but that's all that's left. Kind of a neat concept. The Wanderer writes, Atomic Tethering, an entry in Karn. Atomic tethering is a field of study dedicated to the strength of bonds between atoms and manipulating their strength. Using a process not fully understood in the current field, the strength between these atomic structures can be increased or decreased drastically. In short, you could make a material less dense and much stronger. The applications for that is nearly endless if anyone alive could figure out how it properly works. See, the person who opened this field up was Amelia Hyvens, a leading scientist in Flame. In the scientific communities they knew about her, she's largely considered to be the smartest person in her century. While she left plenty of notes on how she did things, how it worked, and the process she created the prototypes with, she made a few nearly weightless pieces of armor that were incredibly durable, a few highly lightweight speeders, and her personal favorite, a lab coat that could stop a bullet without weighing more than usual. And she recorded her process for all of them, leading to some major breakthroughs. And then she was murdered. While officially it was a robbery gone wrong, nothing was taken from her home. Nearly everyone suspects it was an assassination. But as the killer went missing immediately after they're dead, no one can confirm. And with her death, the entire field of study's progress was drastically halted. See, while her Process was no secret, and the individual items she made had been recreated. How she adapted new materials for it hasn't been. Technically, the answer is sitting in front of them, like an unsolved equation. All of the needed information is present, but none of the answers. And that's where the field remains. Flame is unwilling to abandon something so useful, but after so much effort, diversification is needed, and after a while, it became a backburner project to muse on, and nothing more. It's a cool idea for a relatively futuristic world, especially one that surrounds superheroes, which is what Karn is all about, in which you have an era where there was a genius that was so genius that them dying early just stops the progress they were creating in its tracks. And everyone who attempts to come after has no real ability comparatively to that person to bring it back to life is kind of a sorrowful thing. For day 500, the prompt was, what is an art form born from a renaissance or shifting of eras in your world? And this comes from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord. Bulbman5000 writes, the Renaissance. At the start of Loran's golden age, there was a Renaissance era for art. Great paintings and tapestries made from paint and weave created with crushed, condensed stones charged with elemental energies. The arcane materials telling a story all their own. Alongside this was a growing practice of body paints, also made with these crushed stones. For many, it was a form of expression, especially for mages, as it allowed them to coat themselves in the very elements they resonated with. But it all ended in time, not due to lack of interest, but to the horrors of war with the Scourge. The hordes of ichor dripping beasts from the rotten Scourge, the twisted metal and grinding gears of the mutant Scourge, the writhing flesh of the twisted Scourge, but mankind's pain and fear was guided when the conflicts truly began. The hunt for the feminine by the stalker's horrid claw and talon, the craving for the youth by the predator's hand, the tearing of nations for the carver's art, the sacrifice of the hopeful and defiant for the zealot's dogma. All learned to fear the servants of the patriarch, and with this fear was the Renaissance abandoned. For none could be so artful when the dread of Scourge was so close. I like that this ends up weaving in both the beginning and the end of something. It seems to end sort of prematurely because of disaster enacted on the world, which makes a lot of sense. I like these kind of metered portions in the middle, where it discusses different aspects of the Scourge and what it represents or how it has sort of defiled the world of Loran. For day 501, the prompt was, who is a well-known queer character in your world? And this comes from NYUX and the Discord. Bulbman5000 writes, the fourth champion. Long before the fall of Loran, a peculiar species of sapient, sentient, and intelligent reptiles were found named the Ichdrun. The Ichdrun, alien as they were to the inhabitants of Loran, were welcomed all the same. With their affinity for fire and a particular element they knew how to conjure that their kind named Hellfire, a fusion of dark and fire, the Ichdrun were a fantastical folk to have in Loran. Their mystical fire magics helped refine many of the colossal gemtech structures within Loran's territory. But then, the Sinner Dragon laid waste to the kingdom, and the Ichdrun, like many peoples and creatures, were ferried off to unknown lands. Centuries later, they were found forlorn once more by Xanaheim. Except Xanaheim had a different idea. They were enslaved by the king and queen of Xanaheim, forced to use the ancient magics of their kind to help in their mad quest for power, a mistake that led the stalker right to Xanaheim. Now, after the siege and fall of Xanaheim, the Ichdrun were forlorn once more, taken care of by one of a few similar oddities of their kind. Not a reptile, such as the others, but one more humanoid akin to the Syadra race, her skin pale as porcelain, and hair a dull silver with a faint iridescent sheen. Her people had an ancient name for those like her, a succubus named Zorn. Zorn had a magic just as unique to her, a healing magic unlike any seen on Seroth. She provided for her people in their tiny settlement in the wilderness near Xanaheim's ruin, but didn't hide them long enough. The Scourge caught wind of their presence, and as the Scourge horrors came to exterminate them, 2 siblings and a mage stopped them. The 3 champions, Xeris, Byreth, and Orvis, helped the Ichdrun, fending off the Scourge and guiding them to the town of Kaldane for safety. After which, Zorn began journeying with them, determined to help them save as many people as possible. And for years she did, acting as the healer of the team, as 4 became 5, then 6, then 7, and then 8. For the years that they had been seen together, many quietly believed that Zorn had a thing for Byreth, and possibly vice versa. A prospect that led to many feeling quite vindicated when Zorn finally kissed Byreth after a lengthy battle near the reclaimed Loran, and then relief when it was found that Byreth felt the same. I kind of like that we give Zorn all of this powerful context before then saying, and also this is another piece of them, this lesbian side, or maybe perhaps they could be bi and succubus, I don't know. But, I like that we give the character all of this other interesting context, and then we say, and they are also this queer character that is important in this way as well. But they're not just there to be that. And I think that that's important. I think that this has been well constructed and in a sort of an intentional way. Now that brings us to the end of all of our regular prompts, and it brings us now to Hammer Sparks, which, as I will always remind you, is a section for us to read any kind of writing. It's 3 first-come, first-served slots that do not belong or do not need to belong in any specific prompt. They can be anything that you wanted to write, any creative fiction work. Could be on settings that you've shared before, could be something entirely new. Predwin the Great writes, Tales from the Pit, a setting introduction. He notes at the top, first off, yes, this setting is inspired by multiple other works within this server, but still, I hope to make it feel unique from the others, namely Petrichor and City of Woe. If anyone has any problems with me taking any inspirations, please let me know, and I will stuff this project away into a closet never to be seen again. Until that happens, though, please read this short and hopefully hooking introduction to the world of the Pit. Don't let the dogs bite. I also marked it with Worldhammer for Hammer Sparks so that some folks aren't too confused when this setting randomly shows up in Worldhammer in a few weeks. LOL. The proper entry begins now. Welcome to the Pit, my loves! The first words heard by born babies in hospices of the Pit over loudspeakers. A city without an honored name, instead one made with insult and hatred in mind. The Pit is massive, a city in a maelstrom of agony outside its mile-high walls. Inside, a multi-layer system of streets and houses is held together by the blood and sweat of all who live inside. Familyless men delve into the bloodied sewers to repair pillars that hold up homes, only to be swept up in currents of filth, or more likely drug away screaming by the dogs that hide in the shadows. Nary a candle will be lit in their honor, not a tear shed at their death, for already, seconds later, another house shifts, and another soul falls into the city's namesake, trying to fix it. Yet still, in this hopeless city, there are some who want to mend it, from fragile houses near the peak of the city to individual investigators like one Eli Rhodes. There are people working to make the wood into steel, the rations into steaks, the bandage into scars, but even when cruelty is common, some seek to inflict it more. There is devilry at work within the Pit, and it will take a genius, or an army of street sweepers, to root out the evil under every pavestone. The richest try their best to mend the wounds of the city, or perhaps ignore it, and leave it for those who come after. There is still more trying to heal the city, though, than those who are without a care or who seek to bring it down further. So then, maybe even with such uneven odds, the drop may cease, and the climb to redemption may be yet possible. There's only one way to find out. Keep an eye out for more Tales from the Pit. Really cool stuff. This actually gives me Daidark or Dorohedoro vibes, kind of. I'm not sure if you are familiar with those, Predwin, but for some reason, some of the descriptions here gave me those vibes, those world-building vibes, which is a huge compliment, at least for me. I'm excited to read more of this. We obviously got that One Piece skip up before, which was a super fun read. I'm hoping we get more of this in the next World Hammer. And the second Hammer Sparks entry was also a Predwin the Great, which was Tales from the Pit, Chapter 1, A Great Big Insufferable Leak. He notes at the top, my longest post ever, I think, and hopefully the future ones will be around the same word count. Atovia bot is likely to be a bit off, so the true word count is 2,871. Wowie! If anyone wants me to ping them when a new chapter is done, let me know in this thread, please. Enjoy the read. And if you are interested in having Predwin let you know when a new chapter is done, you should come to the Discord and let him know in this thread as well. Anyone who listens to this is welcome to join. The link should be in all of our descriptions. The proper entry begins now. Tales from the Pit, Chapter 1. It's raining, or downpouring, really, as Rhodes and Mark exit the office. Eli tests the water with his hands, wincing slightly in anticipation. When nothing happens, he reaches back inside for his umbrella and hands it to Mark. They were playing on 53rd, but that had to have been over half the day ago by now. 12 hours at least, so maybe we go check the stacks instead? Oh, we can split up! Rhodes turns to look up at Mark as the giant man unfurls the umbrella. Well, I'm not giving you my umbrella if we split up, so unless you have one of your own... Mark takes a good look at the wall leak happening in front of him before sighing and holding the umbrella over himself and Rhodes. No. He pauses with a solemn look. I didn't. Let's get a move on, but where to? The place you saw them playing. With luck, the leak won't have washed away everything. Gun ready? Mark reaches under his trench coat to reveal a stockless pump-action shotgun, kitted out to the teeth. Eli had seen numerous times when some poor sod thought Mark was all bark and no bite, only to have their chest cavity disappear into a cloud of fine, red mist. Rhodes looks down at his own piece, a bottom-fed dual-action revolver, a Mystagog Arms classic coined the name Roughhouser. It had served him well over these last 13 years he owned it. The .45 caliber rounds certainly add some cherries on top, too. Big rounds for such a small frame, but that's Mystagog for you. Quality products. The two fared off to the warehouses on 53rd, a 30-minute walk through the slums. The wretchways are the lowest, dimmest, most hopeless parts of this already broken city. Rhodes had been lucky enough to go topside, but it's not much better there either. If legends are to be taken as true, once there were mighty noble houses that governed the world below and ushered all into prosperity. Yeah, right, Eli thinks to himself. With time, the pair arrives at their destination. Derelict wooden structures, weeping babes from the windows, and the dung-smeared, marred doorways of buildings claimed by the dogs. The torrent of the wall leak is luckily not of the acidic kind. Moving through and across the rumble of the taller towers that have since fallen down, Eli and Mark arrive to see a group of children still playing in the rain. Weird, Eli questions. You said that they were playing nearly 12 hours ago? Mark nods under the umbrella. Definitely, and theirs are for sure the same kiddos I saw this morning. The three with red hair and the one with blonde. What now, Rhodes? We wait. Watch them for a bit. Gun ready, though. I really don't like how close they are to those buildings. Eli set himself down on a rusted iron milk crate, some ancient relic before his time when there was actual livestock in this hellhole. Mark set himself down, too, taking a squat on some bend trussing and scaffolds. He holds the umbrella between himself and Rhodes with an extended arm. Scooch over a tad. My arm will get tired that far out. The two wait and watch the children play for a while, likely 20 to 30 minutes or so. The rules seem vague, to say the least. One child, that the others dub the Hierophant, sits still for most of the game. It seems that their role is entirely make-believe, having next to no rules about their power or abilities within the game. Still, sometimes, when they exert too much authority over the other players, they complain, and the Hierophant relents their demanding tones. Other roles are apparent. The only blonde child is some sort of game master, directing which circles to jump into for the other two players. Other than this, the rules are strange and seemingly without reason. Perhaps the kids are only playing some sort of make-believe story that only seems to be a game with rules, like a princess in a castle or a duel with sticks, but still, something unnatural nags beneath the surface of their play. They have played for many hours now, and no one has come to find them. Could they be orphans? That alone isn't too estranged down here or anywhere else in the pit, but their sheer lack of safety around the dens here, and the fact that for 12 straight hours nothing has crawled out to rip their thyroids out. It raises an eyebrow, no doubt. You were right, Mark. This is weird. Rhodes looks to the sigils on the ground, pulling out his binoculars to get a closer look without scaring off the kids. Sure enough, 3 of the 5 symbols are the sigils for life, charity, and humility. The very same as the chapels used for worship of the Lady. But the final 2 are without a doubt something more ominous, the sigils for death twice over. The children never enter these circles, but only because the game master never seems to let them. There is a certain desire in the youth's eyes to enter these some circles, a hunger that sends chills down Rhodes' spine. Hey, Mark nudges Rhodes before pointing off to a window. Look, you can see the glint of its eyes. Should we go put it down? Rhodes looks to Mark first before leaning in slightly to the distant window. Sure enough, 2 glinting dots in the shadows of the building. It's looking right at Rhodes and Mark right now. Getting the jump on it would be impossible. No, not right now. I'd rather not get into here anyways. Lady above only knows how many are around here. You said you come through every day? Rhodes slides a fist across his face to swipe the rain from his mouth. A few stray drops have snuck through the defenses provided by Mark. There's a new chill in the air now, a far more primal one. Now that Eli knows that they're awake, the dogs are much a more forefront concern of his. Well, not every day, just this last week, really. They've started construction on 49th, about halfway between your office and my house. I've seen these same kids each time. They even dropped a hound or two so far, but despite my warnings, these rugrats won't scarp her in the slightest. Wait, actually, I think there was a brunette tyke, a boy. Maybe he stayed home today. Wait, no, he was here this morning. You don't think... Rhodes freezes before looking at Mark in the eyes. How dense are you? He looks back out to the children at play. Well, let's head over. Not gonna sit around if these psycho kids have strung their friend up for sacrifice or whatever. Come on. Mark gets up behind Rhodes as he walks over to the children. They don't notice him at first, but once Mark enters their peripherals, they stop gallivanting all over their sigils and talking to one another. The four turn to the duo and shrink down as the two armed men walk up. We don't got no money, sirs. The blonde game master speaks afeard to Mark, almost ignoring Eli if it weren't for the plural term. We's just playing is all, a bit of skip. Nothing special, I swear. He talks as if on the verge of a beating, constantly. Probably not an orphan, then. Just another kid with parents in their place. Eli moves around the kids, opposite of Mark. He takes a moment to examine them as his colleague begins to speak. Where's the brown-haired boy that was with you this morning? Mark tosses the umbrella over to Eli as he places his hand over the trigger housing of his shotgun, eyeing up both the buildings around him and the red-haired girl holding something in her pocket. I saw you this morning on my way to work. I know he was there. I know that you might have done something to him. Eli looks at the redheads first. They were the two running and hopping around at the whims of the blonde boy. The girl has something in her pocket, something awfully knife-shaped. The other, a boy, is twiddling with his thumbs. He keeps his eyes trained on Eli's feet. Are you orphans? Mark continues to interrogate. The kids don't so much as make a peep, but they flinch when he raises his voice a bit. This place is dangerous. There are dogs. They're nice dogs, a girl with hair black as pitch speaks up, the so-called hierophant that made up rules as she whimmed. They wouldn't hurt a fly. She's much thicker than the others. She's well-fed, even groomed, if only slightly. Someone somewhere is missing their daughter. Hopefully, at least. What are your names? Eli asks, walking to finish the encirclement that Mark and himself so desire. My mama told me not to tell that to strangers, the blonde boy says, a grimace forming on his face. He's scared. They're all scared. Good. Your mama should have told you to stay away from the dogs, too. Didn't she tell you what they do to grown-ups, let alone little kids? They'll bite you, they'll rip out your tongue, they'll cut at your tummies. This place isn't safe, no matter how friendly you think these mutts are. Eli works to undermine their confidence, so they didn't have much. Every child is afraid of authority. He just needs to break them psychologically first before he can get the information out of them. Better like this than with pliers and old batteries. That's not true, the black-haired girl speaks up. They are nice. So nice that they'll eat rations from your hand. They're good puppies. Unsettling, that's the only word for it. This kid is the problem, no doubt about it. She's coercing the others to remain with promises of safety and fun. Rhodes knows he has to separate them, but he really doesn't want to get violent with children. Never has, never will. Haven't you at least noticed the rain? He holds his hand out from underneath the umbrella. There's a big breach right now. The sun's even poking through a little from the hole. In 2 hours, Maelstrom Titania's eye will hit the wall and the acid storms will start. Sand and metal flying in is fine. They don't get far. But the acid will fall all the way over here and burn you to goo. We need to get you home. So where is your home? And where's your other friend? The blonde boy looks concerned now. He turns to look at Rhodes before speaking, just above a whisper. He went to get food. The black-haired girl shoots him a dirty look, as if he just told the deepest, darkest secret to ever exist. Shut up, William. They're going to take him away like they did with your sister. She runs over to the blonde boy, placing her hand on his shoulder. We need to be careful, she whispers. You can't trust grown-ups. Any grown-up. Mark looks over to Eli with a look of worry in his eyes. He's thinking something very rash right now. Eli can tell. Eli shoots back a look of disapproval to whatever it is the behemoth was going to attempt, and for now, Mark seems amicable to not acting. Rhodes remembers his surroundings again and sweeps the buildings with his eyes. That same pair of eyes is looking right at him. Maybe it needs some lead-based encouragement to bugger off? No. He doesn't need to shock these kids more than they already are, but he can't put away his gun either. The dogs are too smart for that. They'll come pouring out what with all the ruckus they've made so far. Listen, Mark speaks above the ambient noises of both rain and crumbling buildings around them. He places his non-dominant hand on the pump of his shotgun. Kids, have you ever played dogs or hounds, was it? Mastiffs, the red-headed boy speaks up. Right, Mark corrects himself. Do you remember what the mastiffs act like? Eli's ears perk up. He looks at Mark, then back at the drain-haired girl. He couldn't possibly mean. Try to earn your trust, right? They lure you to their den, and the more of you they trick, the more points they get, or they try to get invited into your house instead. The dark-haired girl starts to look worried. No, you don't get it. What it's like here. We're just playing. The dogs here are just nice. Go away, both of you. Go away now. She's spinning between both Eli and Mark. She feels cornered. She feels like prey. They're said to have black hair more than not. They're said to be girls more often than not. They're said to be smart and nearly perfect mimics to the human body. They lure you to their home and let their kindred eat you alive. Mark steps forward, racking in a shell with a loud snap as he pulls the pump back and then slides it forward. He's trying to threaten the girl. If she isn't really human, she won't die trying to hide her identity. Get away from her, kids. All of you. You aren't in any trouble. Just back away from her. Eli stumbles a bit. A mastiff kid? It's not unheard of, but certainly something he's never seen. If she really isn't human, he hopes that Mark gives him a chance to look away first, at the very least. The kids shirk away slightly as Mark steps forward. The boardwalk underneath him gives way with each step, creaking and snapping slightly under his bulk. His vest certainly adds at least 20 pounds, and he alone is around 310. Leave me alone, the girl stumbles backwards, tripping over a small lip on the floor. She raises her hands to block Mark as he looms over her. Mark finesses his gun slightly, hiding an action from even Eli, though he knows he just did something significant to the firearm at least. Please leave me alone, go away! Mark wavers for a moment, taking a brief look up at Eli. But the detective is turned away. He does not want to see what might happen. Mark looks back down to the girl. She's practically sobbing in quiet tears. He brings the gun close to her, touching her hands with the cold steel. Rhodes, he says calmly, where'd the blonde one go? Rhodes looks back to Mark, then at the kids. Only the two redheads remain, though they've moved behind a small mound of debris. The blonde boy is completely gone now, run off somewhere very, very quickly, or he went into a den. Mark, let her go. Yeah, sorry, miss. He raises up and lowers his gun, loading a shell back into the chamber. It would seem that earlier movement was him clearing the gun. What a show of brilliance from a giant like him. Eli didn't know he could do that. You said that boy's name was William. Where does he live? She wipes her face off, looking between the two men with fear in her eyes. I don't know, Noises stir from the empty buildings surrounding the group, clattering pots, falling furniture, snarling growls. The dogs are stirring. They grow restless. Rhodes looks to the children, then back at the building closest to him. The girl freezes up, shrinking down as she curls up in the rain. They're nice dogs. That's what William said. He said he lives with them. He said that they're really, really kind to strangers. We don't need to be scared, right? Mark raises his gun to one of the windows. Its metallic barrel gleams under the sunlight from the breach as he sweeps the building with his eyes. While he looks, he speaks up to the girl and the two other children still hiding nearby. Be scared. We need to get you lot home now. So where is home? We live next to the tree, the red-headed boy speaks up, peeking his head over the rubble. But he looks saddened by something. He doesn't want to go home, but not because he wants to stay here. But it isn't safe there either. Eli keeps swiveling around, keeping every angle checked constantly, nary a second of time between glances at any given window, corridor, or hole in the floor around him. He, too, speaks up as he walks closer to the two redheads. It's okay. I just want to get some shelter from this great, big, insufferable leak. Let's go. Great sense of dread leaking through a lot of this, the vast majority of the back half of this. And I like the little twist. You know, Mark thinks he's onto things, and then he's like, wait a second. Someone else has disappeared. Really unsettling stuff. There's a lot I just cannot wait to discover about this world. Thanks for sharing this long one with us. I don't know if you expected me to read this, actually, for Worldhammer, Predwin, since it was so long, but I did get a kick out of getting to do that. Hopefully, I did a good job. Hopefully, I did it justice. I can tell you worked hard on this one. And our final entry for Worldhammer episode 14 is Bulbman 5000 writing The Third Champion. 3 years before the fall of Xanaheim, the Avia people, a species of anthropomorphic birds, albeit flightless, lived in their mountain home surrounded by the mountains circling Xanaheim. There lived a youngling named Orvis. Orvis was born to a family of scholars known for their works involving the surrounding areas, and for his first 3 years of life, things were peaceful. But then, while Orvis was at home, babysat by a family friend, his family, his parents, brother, and sister, encountered the Akamana, an ancient Ictrun who had long lost his flame and succumbed to a madness disturbingly close to the scourge. His corruption possessed them, and they returned home like rabid beasts, ripping apart anything in their path. They charged into their home, terrifying young Orvis in their corrupted state. "Go, boy, go!" the scholar roared as young Orvis hid in a closet, only hearing the squeals of his corrupted family and the tear of flesh as he heard others charge into his home. And then the squealing stopped. He poked his head out, but before he saw anything, one of the guards picked him up and held him close, carrying him out of the house quickly. "Mommy? Daddy?" Orvis said through the guard's armor, feeling a tremble as, unbeknownst to him, the guard tried not to cry. Many mourned the loss of Orvis's family, yet Orvis himself simply seethed. As he aged, he grew more determined to learn what he could about magic, to learn how to kill the Akamana, and then Scourge as well. 20 years passed, and he had grown oh so very knowledgeable about the world around him. Magic had roared from him, fire's rage, water's flow, earth's stalwart spirit, yet another element manifested, one that proved dangerous. His trauma manifested as a terrible fear in his nerves, constant and gnawing. This fear manifested lightning's power, and so Orvis had another challenge: to control his fear and prevent lightning from firing from his body like a living tempest. In time, he left his people's mountain home, journeying to find others to help him avenge his family and free his people. He journeyed ever onward into the depths of Xanaheim's surrounding territories, avoiding monster after monster from the scourge. In time, he found himself in the border town of Alphinae. Exhausted, he rested in town, hoping to find others that could help him, but instead, help found him. As he wandered around town, he saw a pair of siblings that were as lost as he, and as they spoke, they realized these siblings, Zerez and Byreth, needed his knowledge as much as he needed their combined strength, and so they began their journey together, not knowing how much they would change the world, or that they were the first 3 of the 8 little lives that would be spoken of throughout the world. Cool to cap off with us getting another little bit of the backstory of one of the 8 little lives, one of the, sort of the key champions, the key characters in Bulbman 5000's world. A great way to end things. Thank you so much for listening to Worldhammer episode 14. Please review us on iTunes, rate us on Spotify, anywhere you get podcasts. Please interact as you can, as you see fit, as you are interested. If you don't, that's fine. We still appreciate you listening, but we love to be able to get all of this world building from all these different writers to as many people as possible. And so the more people that consume this and interact with it and share it is going to mean that these writers' work gets spread to many, many more ears, and perhaps we get some of those ears to come and write stuff for us as well. One way or the other, though, thank you so much for listening. We do appreciate it no matter what you do, and may your world never be lost in the fires of the forge of the Worldhammer.